has been very spotty for quite a while. So that's part of the explanation for why no live streams, no nothing for about the last half year. For those of you who didn't know, back in September of 19, I moved from California to Michigan, Detroit. So Detroit, Michigan, and went there, hoping to see how things were going with the rest of my family. California had felt to start being a bit constraining on the money side, and being that I was and still am mostly the breadwinner of the family, we thought, with some family help from over there, we might find things more bearable. And honestly, it wasn't too bad. For all those horrible things you hear about Detroit and whatnot, if you're willing to work, it's not a really bad place. I managed to get myself a pretty decent paying job. I was earning about $1,000 a week. Uh, before taxes, slightly more for quite a while. Wasn't paying rent. My total bills were about 500 a month tops. So if it had just been me, I would actually probably have stayed in Detroit, honestly, because it was fine. Even on a part-time job, I could have afforded to literally buy myself a house and live on a part-time job and do whatever the fuck I want. But I don't live in a bubble by myself. I have other family members that I'm helping and taking care of for the moment. And we're moving back to California, and boy, what a terrible time to move back to California. With the whole COVID crisis, everything's been really, really awful. So uh, I'm not doing so great right now. I'm not broke, but unfortunately, the current living situation is very hard due to certain laws that were passed during the current shutdown, specifically in the local city where I came back to. So it's looking very difficult for the moment to find a stable place to live. Job wise, well, the job season for the stuff that I usually do is kind of starting up soon. But a lot of places are making it very hard for you to apply because they're either closed or they've shifted things in certain ways that are not so easy to get access to. So there's that. But anyways, here's a video that is a couple of weeks too late, but it's still timely. It still has to do with most of my interests. It's politics, philosophy, and some reflections on what's going on in the world right now. Particularly, of course, from the perspective of the U.S., because obviously I live in the U.S. Most of what comes to my view is whatever's going on in the U.S. So there's that. When this stuff started, like they look at these things and they get hyped up because crisis. A crisis always seems like a really good time for people to believe that class consciousness is going to erupt. If you remember the 2008 stuff, there was Occupy Wall Street that happened, and everybody was raving about it and thought it was going to be this explosion of class consciousness that would lead to some significant reforms, if not revolution. But we all know historically how that ended up turning out. And of course, the left is always the most critical of itself and loves to theorize its own failures. And so we had an immense amount of literature coming out after that, trying to explain why Occupy Wall Street had failed, why it was that the left just could not seem to muster the strength to do anything, even when clearly there was some popular surge among a lot of the populace, that seemed to just be ripe and open for leftist sentiment in 2016, and then its failure again in this round. A lot of people felt the same way for whatever reason. It seems like people don't learn. It seems the left just doesn't learn. But anyways, me and my little group of friends that consistently hang out in our chat rooms. We've been talking about this for the last couple of weeks, on and off, mostly on rather than off. And one of the big things that comes up is, that insofar, ignoring the failure of, these left liberals who are not yet socialists, but who are open to so-called, well, it's the so-called progressive movement. They're blinded by a lot of things. And so there was a whole surge in 2016, and people were like, oh my god, Bernie could possibly win. And then when he lost, they're like, oh man, maybe next time. And there were, quite a few people who, I'm on the capital L left for the most part. And so, I'm always more on the radical side of things. And the people that I followed, were pretty clear on the fact that the election was rigged. Like there were plenty of things that pointed to it. There was some outright obvious shit that was. But the progressives in general didn't seem to buy that message, didn't seem to either be aware of it, or when they heard it, they just thought it was so unthinkable that that the American political system could be corrupt, of all things. That people could actually be stealing elections. What an insane thought. That happens in other countries that not the USA. In the USA, everything's clean and open. We have laws. We have a thing called the Constitution. Can't happen to us. Literally happened quite openly. Just what 40 years ago. Why people don't think it happens now. So God, if anybody remembers the Bush one against Kerry, to clear steel, and still people didn't wake up to the fact that there's a big problem with the whole electoral system to begin with. Forget about the whole like, oh well, the parties dominate the ideology. It's not even that. It's not just the ideology. It's the fact that the systems are rigged. And so when you can't accept that the systems are rigged, and you keep trying to use those same systems and fail, and you keep trying to use the same systems again and fail, uh, you know, you're liable to just be stupid. It's hard to comprehend. So yet again, some clear rigging was done this cycle. If you haven't been aware of that, there was they they made it very hard. There was voter suppression along with just rigging. The voter suppression part was yet again what happened in 2016, where they reduced polling areas, they reduced places that people can vote, they reduced the ways in which people could vote, and so they made it as hard as they could for the masses of people that would go out to vote to actually vote. And so you hear that there's an excuse going around ever since Super Tuesday, where people said, "Oh well, look, the great surge that Bernie Sanders wasn't was expecting. The youth didn't show up to vote," which is bullshit. If you actually look at these stories, a lot of people showed up to vote, and what happened was, well, if you have tens of thousands of people showing up to vote, and there's only one voting booth, and they're college students, and it's just one. People can't stand around in line all day. They've got classes, they got things to do. So a lot of things were made very inconvenient. Not only that, polls were closed before everybody voted, and so people just kind of told to go home. So when people say, "Oh well, people didn't show up," that's bullshit. Complete and utter bullshit. But yet again, it's just to bring up that point that somehow the progressive left, is really stupid on that matter. They don't seem to acknowledge the fact that it was indeed rigging, that the system of the voting system itself is just not just flawed, but set up in a way to disadvantage people. And POC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, you don't hear the squad talking about the fact that really if you want to make reform possible, the first thing to reform is the voting system and the way that all of that is managed. Because so long as you leave that in the power of the parties, the private parties, you're never going to win. You're never going to get your reform. It's just not going to happen. And I mean, that's even assuming that ever got fixed, which is a big if. Where just because you get people elected to Congress, just because you get people elected to the Senate, just because you elect the guy to the presidency, that does not translate directly into real power. It's some power, but it's not the real power that people believe it is. So there's a whole bunch When people talk about the deep state, that's real. You may not like it, you may not be aware of it, um, but basically in every country nowadays, that's a real thing. There is an entire non unelected side of government which manages a lot of things which are very important, and just electing people does not get rid of those people. And just firing like the head guy does not get rid of the whole system of rules and like buddy buddy things, cliques that run in those circles where if you want to get shit done, you have to have people connected. And if you just sack everybody, you've lost a lot of other connections as well. So it's a very hard thing to break, and it's the kind of things that do quite a bit to go against public desires. Uh, in the U.S., it is no secret that the FBI, the CIA, all these secret agencies, alphabet soup agencies, they have their own agendas, and they don't even hide it. By the way, they have their own little reports where they publish every once in a while. And if you actually care to look at them, you can look at them and see that they publish essays about what they think the country should be doing, where they think things should be going, what they think about certain presidential candidates, certain political tendencies in the general population, and what they think they should be doing, meaning they, the agencies, the unelected people, should be doing to counter these public tendencies. So they talk about their own media strategies and what they're doing to shape media, to shape public opinion. Sorry, to shape public opinion. Um, so there's a whole mess. If you Bernie Sanders and do something radical, and not even that radical, by the way, just look at what happened to JFK. JFK did not get murdered for no fucking reason. JFK, it was no communist, was no socialist, but he had some ideas about going against this deep state, and obviously they did not like that one bit. So they're willing to go as far as kill you. And the government knows this, and they know that. And when I say the government, I'm not talking about the elected officials. I'm talking about uh, the deep state, CIA, whatnot. You know, you have to wonder why they haven't released all the files on the JFK assassination after 70 fucking years. You have to wonder why they didn't release them immediately. Well, of course, people who don't people goes like, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. Yeah, and you're a moron. But beyond that, that's just like the reality of things. My friends and I have been talking quite a bit about just how it seems that at least on the internet, at least on the even on the activist level, the left with the capital L, we're moving away from the progressives, which are just left liberals. Also seems to be utterly clueless about what to do, what is important. There's a bit of a joke, or to Coomers, because if you go on Facebook or you go on Twitter and you follow people who self-describe themselves, give themselves that label, left communist. A lot of these people are just not very interested in actually doing anything. They don't like to actually read very much. They don't read much theory, even though they pride themselves in pretending that they read a lot of theory. I'll name drop one person. He's not very famous, but I personally, well, personally, but I more or less directly know him to a very minimal extent. Uh, but he's aiming to grow his influence, if one could call it that, uh, for various reasons, both normal and otherwise just kind of selfish and stupid. This guy goes by the name of Zexacy. Uh, we call him Muke because that's what he used to be called, or he called himself for a while. Um, and you look at his videos, and the kind of introduction, communism, leftism kind of shit. He started out with a meme ideology of like libertarian Leninism, and communist politics was about. Yeah, I hadn't read Capital, but there was another friend of mine. Well, not. It's kind of hard to call him a friend. acquaintance is more like it. We weren't really friends, but we were acquainted because we shared the same talking space with a lot of other people who I was acquainted with, and then became friends. Who was a more or less, committed left communist in the theoretical sense. He didn't really do anything practical. He wasn't partying in any parties, but he read a lot of theory, particularly the theory that comes from groups like Endnotes, Dave, and others. There's someone else that I'm remembering, a bigger name, but uh, not really that important. The point is, a lot of these people, uh, they're communists who don't like the Leninist style, don't like the traditional party style, and so they want to hedge more towards anarchism, and so they have an interpretation of Marx which is a lot more abstract and a lot more philosophical than the average interpretation, which is kind of weird. No, I'm not talking about libertarian Leninist rants, even though I know about that channel. I'm talking about Zexacy. That's literally his YouTube channel name. But anyways, a lot of these people, if you actually read their stuff, they claim to be anti-philosophy. They claim to read Marx as an anti-philosopher, anti-politician, anti-economist. They're the kind of people who say, Marx wasn't doing economics when he wrote Capital. He was just writing a critique of what they call value form, and they focus specifically on this thing, value form. And by that, all they mean is, that which results from the generalized production of commodities and commodity exchange. All of that falls under, what happens in Chapter 1 of Capital, Volume 1. And they see Marx particularly and really at core to be a critic of just this fact of commodity production, and everything else that results from this really maps onto real economics. They're more interested in the philosophical matters, but they also hate philosophy, or at least they claim to hate philosophy. In that, for them, philosophy, they say like, oh, by philosophy we mean metaphysics, and by metaphysics they mean those abstract questions and things which only weirdos like me would be interested in, or physicists. Uh, questions of what is the nature of things, what is the nature of matter, what is the nature of being. Those things are like theology to them. They think that they're not important, that nobody who would ever be a fully realized, actualized human being would ever care about such things. They wouldn't care about questions about what beauty is, or what life is about. No, those are dumb questions. You know, of course, those are the critique of that is itself a philosophical endeavor, and the irony of left communism is, at least in that vein, which I think it's more so the kind of people that Lenin had in mind, when he called when he wrote his critique of left communism and infantile disorder. Uh, you know, which are these are like not just left communists; these are ultra left communists. They're more left than, and their whole spiel is that they want to be more left than anybody else. They love to critique anything and everything that anyone else is ever doing. Nothing that people do is ever good enough. Nothing that you're doing as a party is ever good enough. They're anti-hierarchical. They are more for they're actually, at least the one guy I know who was a legit left communist of that sort. He was mostly influenced by the post-structuralist, quote unquote, left, which comes a lot through the influences of Deleuze, the influences of Derrida, and all these other things. I think that the most explicitly communist work of that era, uh, influenced by that and leading to a line of thought along that, is Empire by Negri and Hart. And I haven't read it, but from what that acquaintance told, wanting spontaneous, organic revolution, where a lot of these people think that it's kind of pointless for you to be creating movements, for you to be creating leaderships, a vanguard, for example, to lead people, because they think that the genuine revolution is going to happen spontaneously. Like Occupy Wall Street. When that happened, a lot of people were raving about like this is what we mean. This is the revolution. And of course, that went nowhere. Uh, and whenever those things happen, they go nowhere. If you do remember the Bush era anti-war movement, which was really big, there were million people marches in the U.S. And it did nothing. And it did nothing. Why? Because, well, one, it was generally silenced by the media. Nobody gave it coverage. And two, a lot of these people did nothing but march and then went home and did nothing further. There was no call for avoid the draft, or no call for like people who were in the military over there to just, give up their posts and go AWOL or whatever. Uh, those kinds of things cost people something, right? Which is exactly why people don't want to do them. It costs something personal. You have to put your body in the line, and that's a very tall order. So you can understand why people don't do it, but nonetheless, that's always what the case has been with any genuine political leftist movement. So there's that. So, anyways, a lot of these people, and Zexacy is a good example. Really, this goes for everybody who is in the so-called bread tube. All the only people I know from that is, there's what is it, ContraPoints, Philosophy Tube. Who else? There's another name, H Bomber Guy. And it's just this attempt of getting the left to have a counter media presence to people like Sargon of Akkad from the alt-right, Stephen Molyneux, talking about him a lot, and he's been a nobody for quite a bit. People like Richard Dawkins, etc., etc. Except when you look at, it's a when you look at it, it's an attempt to have to fight the culture war, right? Uh, but the problem of leftism is that leftism was not initially a culture war, and you can't play it like a culture war because as right from the beginning, with Marx's whole thing was, there's no point in critiquing ideology because ideology arises from actual material life. So if you spend your time just critiquing ideology, you're going to be running circles in which you're not attacking the real problem. You're not attacking why it is that people are susceptible to such ideologies. You're not attacking the real things which make people gravitate to such things. So all these people go and ContraPoints does a lot of things critiquing darn bees. Critiquing gender, the gender norms, critiquing a little bit of capitalists and socialists, whatnot, and they try to make it entertaining. It's this turn towards buying into infotainment, something which I clearly don't agree with because I don't gear my channel in that manner. And some people will say, advise me to, they think I should reduce the length of my things, make it more cogent, more concise, and add a few little moving doodads here and there. That'll get more views. That may get more views, but that doesn't do what I want to do, which is to actually think and actually put out thoughts out there and help other people think. It does no good if you want to improve or if you want to increase the popularity of your idea, and what you put out there that becomes popular is inherently the opposite of your idea, right? If you're a socialist and all the message of that you get to penetrate into other people's heads is the idea that the government should be doing certain things for us. That right now the government has with the COVID crisis, the government has a duty to be bailing out the American people. instead of corporations. If that's all that you get as your message for what socialism is out to people, that may be popular, but that's garbage. And it actually fundamentally goes against the very root of the logic that you want to put forth. I actually have an article written about that, about certain arguments to that sort, in which I think that are appealing to people's capitalist discontent by saying that socialism is a sort of a better capitalism. Like that the problem with capitalism is that the worker does not get the full fruits of their labor. Is a very bad kind of argument because it's not really the kind of thing that you want to put forward. It's not really a communist message. It's not really a leftist message, etc. And by that, I'm not telling you that I'm a communist or a socialist or a capitalist. I'm somebody who shifts around depending on the on the moment of the argument and who I'm talking to and what it's for. I don't like labels like that, and it's not because I don't fall within labels. I'm not a special snowflake. Oh, you can't understand my position. You can. It's just like my position is a lot more nuanced than what those labels generally communicate. So I don't like to box myself in before I get out what I want to actually say. You go to people and say, "Oh, I'm a communist." Oh, and they have preconceptions of things, both on the left and on the right and in the center, as if there is a center. um, So yeah. So anyways, the problem with the whole bread tube thing is it's not really getting at the root of things. The message is also extremely flawed. Particularly you listen to somebody. Let's see, Namnes. I'm not a socialist, but I would define socialism with workers' control. Um, I wouldn't, um, mainly because if you wanted to define it positively, it doesn't really center around workers' control because the whole differential of capitalist and worker goes away. And you're not a proletarian, and you're not working for somebody, but also you're also not working for yourself. And it's also the case that there's a lot of things in which you're doing things that you don't really want to, but you have to, because it's socially required, because somebody has to do it, and you just can't get away with it. It's the kind of things. I mean, it ends up being a little bit like what the Soviet Union did, in which the reality is that if you want certain things in life, if you want society to provide certain things, there's going to be a certain kind of sacrifice that people have to make regarding who does what labor for how long and how. And the ideal is, of course, that nobody's going to be stuck being a janitor their entire lives. Nobody should. Nobody's going to be stuck doing just one miserable job for their entire life. Like nobody should be stuck doing in their entire life working out in the fields, doing backbreaking manual menial labor. Nobody should be stuck in a factory their entire lives doing highly repetitive and body wasting labor. um, and the ideal is simply that these things will be reduced in as much as they can be. That's kind of the socialist ideal. But the ideal that that everybody just gets to go and say like, oh, now I get to self-determine myself, and I'll be free. Well, not in that sense. The freedom is theoretically supposed to be more. In actuality, it has obviously been in various ways less. That's one of the criticisms that can go. I've heard of Paracon. Uh, from what I've heard, it's very complex, but it's also mixed in with a lot of the developments of cybernetics. There's a whole theory of cybernetics that is mixed into that, in which that is supposed to work in. But there's also a sense of things, by the way, in which like um, that kind of system doesn't strike me as working too well. because there's a lot of things that in the modern economy that has nothing to do with anybody needing them and anybody having like uh, a necessity. Like nobody has to have them. You don't have to have burgers. You don't have to have beef patties. You don't have to have a lot of things, but people want them. Uh, and in a capitalist framework of value, there's no distinction between necessary and unnecessary value, like needs. Anything you desire is a need according to the market. You want an ice cream, that's a need. Uh, you want a salad, that's a need. You need insulin to survive, that's a need. Uh, you just want to be a pretty fuckboy and take some hormones to look a bit more feminine. That's a need, and in the market, those needs are all equal. They're no a necessary need and a frivolous need are inconsequential to it. And a lot of people don't make that distinction um, consciously. There is a distinction. Obviously, the socialists talk a lot about like capitalism doesn't produce for need. Produces for profit. Uh, but in that, they don't define need very well, and they don't take care to talk about what kinds of needs and what really can be construed as a need. And of course, then one says, well, ultimately, isn't that an issue in which like the community, society will decide, what it considers a real need, an actual necessary need, and something that isn't a need, a frivolous need. Something with Paracon in which the whole idea is people coming together and vote for certain things. Communities say like, well, I want this much for this year. Community comes together, we want this many TVs, we want this many whatevers. And to me, those questions require you to actually also ask, well, do we really need these things? Just because people want them doesn't mean that we should be producing them. Those kinds of questions come along. Just because we have a lot of things nowadays doesn't mean that we should have them or that we should bother maintaining these systems in which we just keep producing them. For example, think about something like video games. Who the fuck needs a PlayStation? Who needs a console? Who needs a TV in every room? Who needs a personal computer for a lot of things? Sure, we need them for systematic reasons nowadays. Not PlayStations, but computers, for example. But then one has to ask, well, what are we doing with those things? Do we actually need them? Are those necessities in society? And there are things that I think that the kind of genie out of the bottle questions in which distributist economics from conservative Christians. I don't know. I haven't seen anything on that, honestly. Uh, but I would say that I don't agree with that notion of economics. Uh, this is an it's not idiosyncratic per se, but it's a very specific definition within sort of a Hegelian Marxist framework, in which, particularly a Hegelian version of it, in which economics specifically talks about markets. There is no such other thing as economics. I know that there is the whole etymology of economics says, is the taking care of your household from, the Greek sense. But the modern sense of economics is not really about taking care of a household. It doesn't function anywhere like that. As a matter of fact, that's part of the criticism of classical economics, in that it misunderstood how uh, a real economic system works. That it's not like a household at all. That the whole system of production is not the maintenance of a household. It is very, very different. And it has to do with a whole different set of principles. So when we're talking about shifting the way that goods are distributed amongst people, we're not necessarily talking about economics anymore. And so, I find it, at least for me, it muddles more what we're talking about. We're talking about modes of life. Economics is a mode of life, but not every mode of life is economics. So, if you move to a communist framework, are you doing economics? The answer is no, not really. It doesn't function the same way anymore. It has a very different operation. So, if you have a whole like going back to Paracon, for example, the whole idea of just people voting for getting having decentralized communities of production also, but in which people also vote at local community levels, and then that's aggregated later and put through a computer algorithm, and the whole question of, like, do we have the resources, who's making what do they demand, blah blah blah, what do we have to do to restructure things to shift this different level of production, etc. All of those things are a very different question than the way they order things from Amazon. Because a lot of people are now comparing that to say, like, look, isn't that comparable to how we just do everything with Amazon? Isn't that comparable to how we just do everything with just-in-time production? And the answer is, as far as I can tell, not really. They're not the same thing. That if you think that in the Paracon system, you're going to just be able to log onto a computer and say, I want this or that, and the system goes, okay, there's the resources made. Um, I don't think that's how it would work. It also isn't the way that I think it should work. Going back to the whole PlayStation example, there's a lot of stuff in life that is just frivolous nowadays. There's no point to it. Just making it because we can is not a good thing. A lot of modern life is based on the we can, so we will. Um, there's a small critique of consumerism. Before the notion of consumerism was called consumerism, which Hegel writes in a short private quip, talking about what he calls English comfort. And he says, English comfort is this idea that you just want to make life easier and easier and easier, and you just want to buy more stuff. Because it makes your life, easier and easier and easier. Like, why wash by hand when you can have a washing machine? Why have a washing machine over the laundromat when you can have it at home? It saves you one step. And it's further, this saves you one step. It saves you one step, and once you get used to it, of course, going back and, oh my God, everything is horrible. You haven't washed in years. You had a washing machine, it breaks down. Now you have to wash dishes by hand. The the catastrophe of life. You're used to going everywhere in cars, and all of a sudden, everything breaks down, and you have to use bikes. The catastrophe of life. Just everything feels eternal. It's like it feels so slow. But Hegel says, this kind of stuff is retroactively necessary. You make it because you want it. It's not that you really need it. It's simply, you want the convenience, and convenience just you never get done with it. What's convenient at one point becomes a necessity later. And you just build up, build up, build up. And there's a lot of things in which we now have that they're convenient, but are they ultimately necessities? And I think the answer for most of them is no. I think for a lot of things, we can go back to a much simpler life and be totally fine and be the better for it. So anyways, that was a tangent, though. Going back to the whole talk about the bread tubers, you notice a lot about it is about ideology. Also, these people don't get involved in anything concrete. And it's a very bourgeois thing. Like, if your whole thing is, yes, I'm a leftist, and all I do is sit at home, I make videos, I make them entertaining, and I pretend that I'm doing something because I'm spreading the word. It's not really good, especially when what you're spreading out is falsities. Especially what you're spreading out is giving in to the capitalist paradigm of infotainment. So rather than fighting it, these people just dive straight into it. And rather than trying to be genuinely critical, both practically and cognitively, not to imply that cognition isn't a practice itself, because it is. By doing those things, you're not being revolutionary. You're not even being critical in a real sense. And so these people ultimately, I think, are a detriment more so than they are helpful. Mainly because they spread a lie rather than spreading the truth. And people say, well, truth is very hard to swallow. People don't, have a hard time understanding it. We got to popularize things. Um, I don't think so. I don't think that's how it historically has ever worked. I mean, yes, you can't be giving monologues and reading people monographs. Whenever you go and talk to them about something like socialism or anti-capitalism, etc. Uh, but you don't have to simplify it to absurdity and just erroneousness the way these people do. Uh, I've watched some of their videos and like they're horrid. Honestly, they don't understand what they think they understand, and therefore they believe lies and they just spread more lies. And when somebody comes along and says, "Hey, I think you got that wrong," they're so used to dealing with idiots. I understand it that so many right wing idiots come and say like, "Oh, but what about this?" Or even left wing idiots who know less than them go like, "Oh, I don't think you understand this, and you were wrong about this," and they get jaded, they get callous, and they stop paying attention. Unless you're a big name. You have to be. They'll pay attention if you're a big name, and even then, the ego gets in the way, and they're not very likely to listen to anything that you have to say, even if you're right, even if you want to explain things to them. Um, they're so used to just assuming that they're right. They're so used to being lauded by their audience. Pretty big audience, by the way. Some of these people are making quite a bit of money. Uh, ContraPoints is making quite a bit of money, and I mean, like, probably in the at least $10,000 a month range. Uh, and I find it sort of a sad irony that these people, hide their money. They like to flaunt how many followers and Patreons they have, but they actually hide how much money they make, which is a bit hypocritical. So beyond these people is just like the loads of people on left Twitter, left Facebook, left book, etc., who are just memesters. And I can understand it. A lot of these people are frankly like teenagers and people in their early 20s, mid 20s even. Who it's the way that society has gone. In the time where they have been growing up. It's this sort of ironic take on reality where nobody's serious about anything. Where people revel in their debauchery and frankly their degeneracy. I know that's a right-wing term most of the time, especially like a alt-right term, and people are like, "Oh man, haha," they're talking about degeneracy, but degeneracy is real, people. Uh, it's just like stupidity. Like society has honestly become a lot more stupid. That's not a well, maybe. No, it has. People have become a lot more degenerate. People are a lot more hedonistic. It's a very capitalist thing. We can't pretend that leftists are somehow immune to this. They live in a society just like everybody else. They fall to ideology. And the thing about ideology isn't just what you consciously believe. Ideology is also just the way that you live. And you may believe consciously certain things, and you live very differently. Um, and this is part of the whole ideological apparatus as well. So you may profess communism, but you live your life like a capitalist hedonist, and that's a big problem with a lot of these bread tubers and other people and their followers and fans. The joke about left coomers is that all these people just take this to be a club, a really bizarre club of pseudo intellectuals and memesters, but still it's a club. It's a way to meet friends. It's a way to share interests, and it's mainly a way where a lot of these people just have for whatever reason they're very sexually prone, uh, and so they'll post a lot of sexualized content, and they'll make a lot of sexual jokes and whatnot. And they think there's no problem, and they think like, well, socialism is about sexual liberation, anyways, right? Uh, why not? Why not reveling in sexual debauchery and whatnot? From their standpoint, sure, why not? But that's a liberal standpoint. Uh, they like to talk about dialectics, but the reality is, if you ask me, their standpoint is quite undialectical. Uh, and actually, I'll give you an anecdote. Like there's one of these bread tubers who goes by the name of Mexi. She's not big, but she's actually sort of in a circle with Zexacy, H Bomber guy, and all these other people. Uh, and she'd been like when I first found out about it was because of Zexacy, because again we still had some rapport between each of us. Not that I give a shit about him honestly, because I don't. Ever since I met him, I told him exactly what I thought about him, and I said like, "You'll become this," and you know what? I was right. Oh, my dog is going after for another dog. Let me go get him. Come on. Sorry about that. Over here. Come on. Go the other way. Come on. But anyways, what was I saying? Ah, yes, the Mexi Sing. And so she would post things about, she's, I forget what it is she was doing, like anthropology, sociology, something like that. And clearly she was getting into the whole Marxist stuff and very anti-capitalist and blah, 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 and making these videos. And honestly, I find her dreadfully boring. She's not a very good lecturer of any kind, not very creative in videos either. But, she was asking around, she's like, I wish I could understand this whole dialectics thing. I know, I'm trying to read Marx and I read all these other people and they make sense. But when I read Marx, I just don't get it. And I sent her various messages. I'm like, hey, I can teach you. Look, I've written all these blogs. I've made all these videos. I've taught it to people who are not, masters, not doing a master's or a PhD program. They're barely starting college. Some of them haven't even started college. And I could teach them, and they got it for the most part. So, you should be able to learn quite easily. And I had plenty of time at the time. She just ignored me. And it wasn't because at the time she was very popular. She actually wasn't. This was before, popularity. Yes, that Mexi. But anyways, at the time she didn't have that many followers, so she wasn't being inundated by DMs or tweets. So I knew she had seen my messages. There's no way she hadn't. Especially when she was you could tell that she was tweeting pretty often, so she was responding to a lot of people. She would not respond to me. So once I asked her like like a year later, I'm like, hey, like, because she was saying this thing again, and I'm like, I messaged you last year various times, and you just ignored me. Like, like what's up? Am I like, persona non grata or whatnot? And she's like, oh, I'm sorry. I just don't think I saw them. But then I reiterated in that in that tweet that, hey, you want to learn dialectics? I can teach you. I still got time. I got plenty of patience, and surely you can understand it. Once again, she just ignored me, and that's most of these people. They're stuck in their own little world, and they say they want to do certain things, but if you're not part of their clique, they don't want to know about you. They don't give a shit. So that kind of annoys me a lot. If you say that you want to learn something, and here comes somebody who's, uh, you know, sure, I don't have a lot of followers, I don't have a lot of weight, but what I do have is that I have proof of what I've done, and I've done it. And so when these people just ignore things like that, it really annoys me. It also annoys me, when they go into these pseudo-critical moments in which they go like, oh well, but I really don't know what to do, and I'm not telling anybody to do anything. I don't. That's kind of based on the assumption that somehow you would know how to recognize what the fuck people should be doing anyways, which a lot of these people don't. A lot of the problems with like left tube, bread tube, is that a lot of these people don't really understand how the world works concretely. They understand the world abstractly, which people would find it kind of funny. I think that they think I'm an idealist. They're like, oh, this guy likes Hegel. He must believe in the world of abstractions. And the main thing that I hammer on these people all the time is like, you're not concrete enough. you you seem to be missing the trees for the forest, and strangely enough, I don't think you see the forest either. So my friends and I have been talking about quite a bit of this, about like, well, what's the problems? There's the problem in which, like, you don't get to dictate the revolution, right? Just because you put a message out there, just because you're yelling at people that, look, this is important, doesn't mean that people recognize it as important. Uh, Ideas, funny enough, have a place and a people, and if those things don't come together, an idea doesn't take off. Like in the U.S., um, right wingers, right wing shit, liberal shit is taking off like crazy. But leftist stuff isn't. And it's not because there isn't anything relevant in leftist stuff. There is. It's just that the way that the relevance is put forth is not at all how it is relevant concretely. Anti-capitalism is relevant, but communism isn't. Progressivism, reform is relevant. But left criticisms of how to reform things, to lead to socialism aren't. Those kinds of things. So there's a whole social element in which you as an individual just don't get to dictate, how people perceive and receive your ideas. And if you keep hammering those ideas in the same way, you can't be surprised that they don't take off, and you can't be surprised that you look around you and you say, look, my followers are rising, my views are rising, my clicks are rising, and my trending tweets and posts on the internet are rising. Leftism is rising. That's just an appearance. That's not a reality. A lot of people mistake the internet for reality. What the internet is, a highly polarized place where both the left and the right are rising. The left visibly, the right not so visibly, but it still goes on. And the difference between the right and the left is that the right actually does things in real life, concretely, whereas the left does not. And this isn't something about like, oh well, the left has forgotten how to organize or whatnot. Part of it is, yes, they have, but another part is the obvious fact that whenever the left has actually successfully tried to organize, they get murdered. That's kind of the problem. Whenever we've had actually successful leaders, they've gotten just straight up murdered. You cannot expect that you'll put out a genuinely leftist idea that isn't just a concept in people's heads and actually gets them moving, and expect that you're going to get away with it. I think that the last genuine movement of this sort was the Black Panther movement. And I didn't know much of this. I actually learned about it from a tweet chain by a guy I follow by the name of Irami Ose Frimpong. You should follow him on Twitter and Facebook. The guy has hot takes for days. He's a Hegelian first, a Marxist second. And boy, he roasts the left for very concrete reasons. But anyways, in that tweet chain, I learned about how the Black Panthers were doing a lot more than just organizing in the black community. They were starting to make inroads of bringing together Irami Ose Frimpong. So IRAMI-OSEI-FRIMPONG. So Irami Ose Frimpong. Anyways, going back to the Black Panthers, they were bringing together everybody from all walks of life, all races, all kinds of issues. They were unifying these people, and a lot of these people were seeing that the Panthers were actually succeeding at something, and so they were interested in working with them too. And it's when that started happening that the deep state clearly got nervous, and they said this guy has to go. And so if you looked at the history, what happened. people got killed for the Black Panther Party, and that ended up signaling when the leaders got killed. Nobody else existed that could take over that spot. Nobody had the charisma. Nobody had the trust of anybody else to that extent. Uh, and so they cut off the head, and the movement died off. The same thing with the civil rights movement, which then, after the civil rights issues, started shifting towards more universal issues of the working poor movement, or I forget what the exact name was, but everybody knows that King was really killed for that movement rather than for the anti-racist movement. Anti-racism, capitalism can deal with. Um, workers' power, it could also deal with, but capitalists will not, because they like their own concrete power. This is a sort of a contradiction between capital as such and capitalism, where what is good for capital is not good for capitalists, mainly because what is good for the system is actually not good for individual capitalists. If you have somebody who has a monopoly, and the price of saving the system is to give up their monopoly, they'll rather keep their monopoly and destroy the system than save it, right? It's not even it's not a matter of ideology in truth. It's a matter of keeping power. And power is always obviously personal here. You can get into the Foucauldian thing of power is really flows of power and systems of power. Yes, in the broad scale of things, but concretely, power is individuals. Power is these people pulling the strings. Power is the capacity to say get this done and actually getting it done. So the left got cowed over the decades, both by the successful red baiting campaigns, as well as just the general murder of their leaders. And without great leaders, a lot of movements just go to shit. The left tries to play this off as like, oh well, leaders don't matter. It's all about the ideas, and it's not them, it's us, or like not me, us, like Bernie says. But the reality is that you really do. The way we function as social animals, generally, seems to be that we need an individuality to be there to sort of guide the motion. Like we're not very good without good leaders, and a good leader is a charismatic leader. Somebody who just has, for whatever reason, a force of appeal. Sorry about that. Has a force of appeal, as well as just they know their shit. You don't get a Lenin every day. You don't get these people rising every day. They're very rare, in fact. It's also why like most people just can't do business. They can't do. They can't run a corporation or whatnot. You need a certain force of personality to do those things. You can't just be anybody. And unfortunately, most of those people with that force of personality are not people who are good people, or people who are very conscientious people, or even thoughtful people. So that's part of also what's happened with the left, that we haven't had good leaders. And as far as we've had good leaders of sorts, it seems that they've just shifted entirely to theory rather than practice. We have people like Zizek, who else? I don't really read much theory nowadays. Not that I ever really read that much either. But people like Zizek, they're very popular. They have popular ideas, but it ends up being just thoughts. Popular thoughts, but they don't lead to anything concrete. And that's mainly a thing in obviously the first world, right? We're talking about uh, first world problems here. In the third world, it's not so clear cut. There still are leaders. We still have like the Evo Morales people. We still have the Lulas. We still have we still had Chavez. Maduro, unfortunately, falls very, very short. Uh, but there's still people like that in the world, just not in the first world. And a lot of what those people have is that they have charisma, but it seems that they lack knowledge, and they lack the conviction necessary to do what has to be done. And then that's part of the problem of what hats on me. That's part of the problem of what has to be discussed also. That even if you get power, even if Bernie Sanders wins in the U.S., for example. Hey, Lime Boy, it's been a long time since we talked. Hope you're doing okay, man. Anyways, as I was saying, even if somebody like Bernie Sanders wins in the U.S., for example, there's a whole lot of problems that he has to overcome. Even if he won, there's the whole Congress and Senate in opposition. Like you get a couple, progressive other people in there. That's nothing. That's not a coalition. That's not a group that's threatening to them. They can veto whatever he passes. Another one, and really a more important one, is the issue of judges, right? It's like a lot of things can be done, which then the states can challenge, which then, when brought up to the the Supreme Court on the constitutional basis, it's on the whim of the justices, how much they care about what he's doing, whether they want to help it or not, whether they want to interpret it charitably or not. That's mainly the thing about how they're going to rule on it. If you don't have the courts on your side, you're fucked. And we're in a time in which even if Bernie won, the courts aren't on our side. And really, the most important one of all is the military. Like, what would stop the right and the liberals, the neoliberal center left, from just crying the same way they cry about what Trump's been doing, and saying, "Oh my God, this is unconstitutional. Oh my God, we need to impeach. Oh my God, they try, and then they might not succeed." And people have been saying, like some people are already talking about, like, what would we do, if somebody was so corrupt, we just had to take them out of office, and somehow the other checks of power failed. Wouldn't we have to have something, like a coup? Wouldn't we have our military to have to stand in, at some point, and you say, okay, this is enough. Like this guy's out of his element. It's gone beyond what is tolerable. And what makes you think they wouldn't do something like that to Bernie Sanders? And the answer is, well, there's no reason not to think that they wouldn't. And changing the military culture and the military structure, and I mean, that's not even counting the CIA, FBI, all these other secret intelligence agencies, which are unelected, and which, just because Bernie gets into power, these people don't suddenly become progressive. Actually, these institutions are, by and large, not just conservative, but highly reactionary. So, changing that entire system is crucial. Like, part of why Venezuela has not been coup, despite how much effort the U.S. has put into it, is that Chavez, when he took power, did a ton of work in restructuring the military and changing the military culture. When they tried to first coup him in 2000, yeah, he's right there. He doesn't run away. He's a good boy. Except for when people walk by, then he acts all big and tough, and goes and tries to attack them. That's the only annoying thing. And I don't want to put him on a leash right now. He's just chill most of the time. But anyways, what was I talking about? Venezuela, they changed the whole military culture. When they tried to coup Chavez in 2000, who came to his aid that stopped the coup despite being initially seemingly successful? People went out to the streets, and most importantly, the military itself turned against the coup leaders. A significant group of the military broke off, decided to encircle the palace yet again, put the coup leaders under arrest, and demand that Chavez be returned, and he was. You need to do that. Why is it that in Bolivia, Evo got ousted? He didn't do that with the military. Despite how good he ran the country so well that he was on mark, on projections to become economically independent, to pay off all the debts to the IMF. The right wing managed to put up a whole ideological charade about how things were actually going terribly bad despite being so good, and how people were worried that Evo was going to be doing unconstitutional things, communism, and of course the military went along with it. Is it very loud? Well, right now it's not blowing. Hopefully it's you don't hear it anymore. So anyways, the military went along with it, and so part of that problem is military culture wasn't changed. When the left got ousted in Brazil, how was it done? The same way. The courts, the military are right wing, and so you get a left wing face into politics, you're not going to accomplish very much. And so yesterday actually we were talking about, let me go get my dog. Come on. Sorry, come on. It's an old man, he's not going to do anything to you. Come on. Alright, sorry about that. Anyways, is the noise alright right now? I mean, there's wind blowing, so I'm trying to cover the microphone up. But I'm not sure. Is that fine? Hello, hello. It's better now, okay. So, anyways, I was talking to a friend yesterday. He's in Florida, and he gets into all these groups like DSA, and he was part of Redneck Revolt and whatnot. And he's genuinely wants to do something, but a lot of these groups, if you notice, end up doing a whole lot of nothing, and it's mainly because they function in a more anarchistic style of also just like they all suffer the problem of the typical split issue on the left, where you have some ideological issue or you have personality problems. Usually ends up being personality problems more than anything. Like apparently Redneck Revolt got split mainly because the leadership was accused of certain things, particularly rape, and obviously the leadership is surrounding itself with its own followers, and so then the followers say no, don't want to hear about it, didn't happen, don't believe it, and it just becomes a whole struggle of trying to get some accountability going, and so that group ends up splitting because of that. I've seen I've heard about splits in the DSA happening the same way, just personality problems, people abusing their power, and of course you expect this to happen with all these kinds of things. It's people, groups, people problems. So of course it's going to happen. And apologies if my eyes look a bit red. The allergies are terrible right now. But either way, we were discussing about how okay, fine, if you can't get vertical power from the top because of all these barriers. Doesn't it make sense to start from below? And the answer is that for the most part, not really. Uh, because at least in the question of the political sphere, if you can't get political power from the top, can you get it from below? Can you start at local politics and then move up? Can you take over a local mayorship, a local city council, and start moving up the chain? Um, and these same issues, oh, sorry, the same issues of politics and personal barriers arise. The institutional barriers arise. Like if you take over a city, what does that accomplish? Kashama Sawant in Washington, Seattle, Washington, got into the city council, and yeah, she started shaking things up. But really, what does that accomplish for the rest of anybody else? You may accomplish some local things, but how anti-capitalist can you really make those things? If you go take over one of those local towns in one of those states in which they've passed ordinances where you can't create your own public utilities, regardless of how nonsensical it is. Like suppose Comcast is charging exorbitant amounts to bring internet to your town in the middle of nowhere. Can you make your own utilities and not be held hostage by Comcast? In some states, there are just state laws that they pass, completely bought by the corporations, where it's illegal for a town to do that. In some places, it's totally legal. But supposing that even if it is legal and you manage to do that, you manage to do these things and set up land trusts for public housing, to help with rent controls of these things, are you really moving things leftward? Are you really, engaging in the real movement, anti-capitalist development? And to me, the only way that you could do that, the only way you could say that you were actually accomplishing that is if you start to make networks of power, of real power, not just apparent power, not just like AOC, star power, but real power, where your town, your successes in wherever position you're at actually transfer to other places, such that suddenly you become a base of support for other people accomplishing other things. And when people accomplish other things, they become a mutual base of support for you. And it's not just verbal support, but material support. Like for me, what that would look like is you somehow pulling up Bernie Sanders, what he pulled out in Vermont, becoming mayor, and say getting your city, and somehow in achieving that, you're going to help someone else get elected somewhere else, say in Detroit, and then you get that some other person elected in there, and then they get other people elected in there, and then what you do is say, okay, this city, Detroit needs certain investments, and we need certain goods. So what we're going to do is, even though it's not the most cheap thing in the world, we're going to make a deal with Detroit. We're going to give them a contract for supplying this much for that. Do they have the infrastructure in Detroit? Whether they do or do not, you're putting in the money, you're putting in the effort for making these material links, which are real power, in anywhere really, because that's what people fear most, particularly the rich. For you to have the real material means to get out from under their thumb. Now, could you actually do that in the U.S.? And it seems to me it is virtually impossible, because the way that the whole federal system is set up is that there is a lot of ways for other states to meddle in between, even two states who, or let alone two cities, in different states that want to do these kinds of contracts, these kinds of, tit for tat, what would you call it? Solidarity, real solidarity. That seems impossible, and that's the only way that becomes meaningful. Otherwise, you have a lot of problems. So it seems, if you really want to create that kind of solidarity, the only way to do it is through non-government organizations, through businesses. Somehow you create a left business and you're successful, and what do? Well, now you want to spread this, not just where it is economically feasible, but also where it is materially necessary, where you're gonna do something, where you're gonna, not just hire people, but you're gonna create a community that is, ideologically geared towards something. And that's a very different thing. That's a very difficult thing to do. So, rather than posting on Twitter, rather than posting on Facebook and making all these videos and memes that go nowhere, yes, they spread and, it goes to the consciousness, and people are like, well, isn't that doing something? Well, no, not really. Ultimately, it does nothing. Oh, sorry about that. But yes, so read Ivan Illich, Tools for Conviviality. I'll try to keep that in mind. I mean, I'm talking about it in like abstraction here, but it's stuff that has been attempted before. I was talking to my friends and saying, look, the Zeitgeist movement, back in like, sorry for the wind, back in like 2010s, the early 2000s, mid 2000s, was trying to do things like that, where they were trying to get communal projects going across the nation, tool libraries, public gardens. Get over here. Hey. Come on. You think he'd like to be outside a lot more, but he just likes to walk a little bit and he just wants to get back inside the car. Come on. He's funny when he runs. Come on. Here, for those of you who haven't seen him in a while. Oh, there he is. Come on. Unfortunately, he's gotten fatter. Because when I was working in Detroit, I had no life. And I had no time to be walking him. So he would just eat and sit at home. Come on. Come on. He's smelling something in somebody else's car. Come on. Oh, he wants water. Come on. I'll get you water. Come on. Just give me a second. Let me get him some water. Alright, back. Sorry about that. No, he did not lose any weight at all. He's gained weight. So he's, I think he's fatter than he's ever been. Am I saying that the left's head is in the clouds? Yeah, basically for most of it. That's the basic criticism, that they're just not concrete enough. Not only that, like you have to also just acknowledge that we're in a moment in which globally things are going backwards. We're in a reactionary moment uh, of public consciousness. It doesn't have to be that way, but it just happens to be that way. People are under the illusion that the majority of people are progressive. People are also under the illusions that you came into the life. It's a fitting thing. Yeah, it's basically. It seems that a lot of the lessons have definitely not been learned. And right. Hopefully that's good. And blowing to the microphone. Anybody let me know? Well, it seems the wind is fine. Anyways, he likes to come to the car and then he just he's always panting, but he doesn't want to sit outside for whatever reason. Even if I get like a towel and just put it on the ground so the grass isn't bothering him. Yeah, generally the left doesn't know very much history. Uh, Usually the ones who are obsessed with history are the Stalinists. But they learned the wrong lessons, and they think that what we have to do is we got to go back to Leninism, and that was the problem of the left. They think left Leninism. 1968 was good. I would say 1968 was a necessary moment in the left, but that it's a moment in which the wrong lessons were learned. Okay, DeAndre says, however, as far as the topic is concerned, I feel like people are putting party before country. I'm independent. I vote for the best candidate despite their party thoughts. Well, yeah, that's true. People definitely seem to just vote upon party lines. I mean, the fact that anybody thinks that Biden is viable is beyond me. The fact that people are just voting people who don't like Trump still vote Trump because he's not a Democrat. That's beyond me. It's a level. It's part of the stupid. The word kind of etymology fits. It's part of the stupefaction. Making stupid of just uh, people in general. It's ridiculous. Voting for the best candidate doesn't do anything, especially in the U.S. In the U.S., because of the whole setup of the voting system, you gotta. The only viable things are the two parties. Some people have been talking about like, oh, people have been saying this for a while, like, oh, we need a third party, we need a third party. And some people realize that the only way to make a viable third party is you somehow have to pull equally from the right as well as from the left, and they don't know how you do that. And it's not because you can't do that. Actually, I was shown a graph by the Bob Knight here. Hello, Bob. A couple of weeks ago, showing about how there's a myth in the U.S. about people who are socially liberal yet financially conservative, and how that voting bloc does not truly exist. Those people are with the Democrats on the social issues, but there were Republicans on the financial stuff. And I do personally know two people who describe themselves that way. Uh, but the real big majority of people fall into this thing that people don't generally recognize, which is socially conservative and financially liberal. So therefore, Medicare for all, therefore, an inclusive welfare state, therefore, a lot of these financial policies, which are really good, uh, but they don't like gay marriage. They don't. They don't like the gays. They don't like the trans people. They don't like political correctness, and they definitely don't like all these other people, SJWs and whatnot, just yelling at them and saying that they're deplorables and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so these people, tend to also just vote right. They don't like immigration either. And so the left takes these people as persona non grata. They're not people that they're willing to court because they take the social surface issues to be more important than the economic issues, which I think is the wrong way to go about it, really. Because you can make a lot of these people come under you not by putting out a conservative message. You don't have to go reactionary or conservative. All you literally have to do is just stop talking in the language of political correctness and stop acting in that. There is a chance that a third party could be made and be viable against these, but it's literally it's not up to the right, but it's literally up to the left to just like suck it up and admit that these are close to as important as the economic issues are. With economic problems, you can set up the groundwork of the foundations for dealing with the rest of those stuff afterwards. You can literally start setting up the institutions which matter for creating the basis of those things, more so than you accomplish by just simply yelling at people. No, not to say that those people have just yelled at people, because if that was it, it wouldn't be so bad. These people really do have some kind of ideological power. There is the whole culture war really happening in that set of things. DeAndre, spread the word. The black vote is changing. If Republicans have more to offer the black community than Democrats, the blacks are jumping ship. No more loyalty to Democrats. I think that would be a positive thing if that were to happen. But I'm not so sure. But then I don't follow those things too much. Anyways, what was I saying? Yeah, the black vote. The black vote's. I don't know if that's changing too much. It's what was it? How many people? What was it? 13% of black males did not vote for Hillary Clinton last election. And there were some people going oh my God, it's like these people tanked us or whatever. And then people looked at how many people didn't vote for Barack Obama for the second election. It was actually comparable. So there seems to be a Republican or non-democratic voting slice of the black vote, but at least in the last couple elections, it hasn't shifted significantly any further. So and it seems to me that Republicans haven't made any overtures at all to even pretending that they have anything to offer the black population. What was it? I think Trump brought some stuff up last election, and when she said, "Look, they don't even give you anything," and I mean he was right, and his thing was well, they don't give you anything, and I'm not going to give you anything either. So how's that supposed to draw other people to vote away from Democrats? I don't know. Definitely, it would help the black community to stop being a captured vote. However, I mean, look at how much Latinos, quote unquote Latinos, and by that, let's be honest, I mean Mexicans, because most of the Hispanics in this country are Mexicans. They're not Central Americans, which are the ones who generally are called Latinos by the Mexicans, because they're different. These Spanish-speaking people, they're different from us, and they're like, well, you're different from us too. And then the ones in the South, they're different too. And somehow people lump them in together in the U.S. like, oh, they're all Latinos. No. But yeah, you look at them and like, they're not a captured electorate. They kind of vote 50-50 for the Republicans and Democrats, and so that's why they actually get things. Because they have to offer things to them, and that's a very difficult thing. Like in order to get that kind of vote, since the Republicans have get into power despite not having that block. Uh, they have no incentive whatsoever to give anything to black people. I mean, that's the reality. They don't need them. I mean, their whole strategy was to do it without them. They can't do it without Latinos. They can do it without blacks. So, they're willing to make that bet because it's a bet that's pretty much worked. So, how black people are going to get it better with Republicans. Seems you're in a catch-22. The only thing you can do is punish the Democrats, or the better thing to do is get out into the streets and just make it so that it's a problem for both parties, and something has to give. Okay, sorry. So Bob Knight, Trump books truly are going to win working people over, including black workers. I think so. Not with a single check. Like if they had made it a month, like a recurring thing until the whole thing is lifted, I think you can make that argument. Mimus, why were you away for so long? I moved out of California for like about 6 months, and I'm back now, and I was working a lot. So I really couldn't get anything done that I wanted to get done, and I had no time. And now I have all the time in the world, and I have kind of all right internet connection, but currently I'm living in my car, so I can't even go to like a Starbucks and just chill there, or a library and chill there and like write or edit videos all day. Closed. So it's not a good time for me right now, and I tried to do some live streams before, but like because the internet was just crappy in Detroit. Not everywhere, but like at least the places that I could go to without spending too much driving were not that many. I mean, there was a beautiful park close by, and like I tried to do a live stream once or twice, and every time, like, very nice place, very good for just walking and talking, but the internet connection was just so spotty, and I deleted most of those partial attempts. So after that, I just gave up. As you can see, I'm back here, and I might have some time for the next month. Yes, I am technically homeless and jobless at the current moment. Not because I'm broke. I actually have money. It's just that currently the places that I can afford aren't letting people move. So until this is lifted, I'm kind of like screwed. It's also the case, I can't. So yeah, come to Oregon. I would honestly, but currently it's not viable. Like it's just not me. Like, I have like it's me and like my parents, and so it's not the case that we can all move right now. Actually, we all moved back, and this was just like the longest move ever. Hey. They just ran by. Be quiet. Stop. So, you have a couch until July. Nah, it's fine. I mean, it's not the worst thing in the world. Literally, the worst thing right now is simply the dog barking nonstop at random people walking by. Uh, but really, the worst thing right now is simply that everywhere that was a public spot, a public space that you could go to and hang out and do stuff, like necessary stuff, is closed. Like literally right now, public parks are closed, and by that is not just national parks, but all public parks. Uh, Public parks which have public bathrooms are closed. So public bathrooms. If you're homeless right now, boy, you're kind of screwed. Like I was lucky to find a park in which they have porta potties, and they haven't locked those up. Thank God, because that's literally the only place I found that I can go to the fucking bathroom. Besides going, to a Walmart or something. That's quite shitty. The other thing is obviously like you can't go to a gym, and you can't even go to a gym and like buy a cheap $10 month membership, and there you go, you can go take a shower. No, Bob. I'm gonna call you Bob for the rest of the day. See how you like it. So that's really the shittiest right now. It's just kind of like very limited on bathroom options and showers. Everything else, it's bearable, and I don't have too much stuff. Sleeping in the car is not the worst thing in the world. But anyways, enough of my personal life right now. Just kind of going back to the whole issue of what could be done, and we were actually discussing, my friends and I, about if one wanted to actually do something concrete, and start actual networks, you'd have to do something which initially costs you money. It's you'd have to save up money and spend money, and the best thing would be you could go somewhere to Detroit, for example. There are places in Detroit where you could buy probably an entire block, demolish all the houses, turn that into a basically. A lot of places in the Detroit metro area, which is bigger than the city of Detroit, in Michigan, don't have grocery stores nearby. They have the local, corner store, but they don't have supermarkets. They don't have those places. Move in, buy a lot, and start doing something like this, and then offer it as a community service. Not paid, or at first you good luck getting it. People to pay you, but even if you then require, you can't upkeep it through whatever monetary stuff you do on the side. Getting a minimal, very very low subscription to a public garden of you get fresh vegetables and stuff delivered. It's every so once a week, twice a week, or whatever, for a very low amount. A low donation. You're not even selling, but you're just getting a donation in return. You can do stuff like that, and I think some people attempted to do this in various other places, but not really in the places where this is really most necessary. And the wind just picked up. Is it fine? Hopefully it's fine. Let me know. But anyways, doing something like that, I think, would probably be one of the best things that you could do if you're a leftist. Forget about we got to do unionizing work. And there's this obsession that the only way to engage the left project is either through attempting to take on politics directly, or to
go into workspaces, and try to unionize against capitalists. Do you watch left-wing YouTubers? No. There's nobody that I care about or like think that they're very insightful. There's people that I watch just to have on the background. I mean, like, and they're not really leftists. Like, uh, I hate Mexi. Well, I don't hate her. Not as a person. Like, I just find her very boring. I don't like her videos. I don't think she has anything interesting to say. I think her focus on veganism is stupid. Uh, I think that as a vegan, she's not a very good vegan either. I mean, uh, has typical arguments, typical philosophical arguments, which are not very good. It's like there are very much more refined views. Well, holy shit, libertarian Leninist rants. Somebody mentioned your channel earlier. Yeah, somebody mentioned your channel. Didn't know that you followed my channel. So yeah, no, I don't watch Mexi. I don't watch anybody. Like the only people I tend to watch occasionally is Jimmy Dore, and I just kind of like listening to Jimmy Dore in the background for his righteous indignation and anger. Other people that I mostly like listen to are like Nico House, not because I actually listen to what Nico House has to say, because honestly, Nico House is very stupid. He's a very stupid progressive liberal. Uh, and I hate that he titles everything in his videos breaking news when it's just news. Not only that, it's old news by the time he reports it. And his takes tend to be pretty stupid. Libertarian Socialist Friends, his name's a mute parody. Uh, yeah. I don't know who Hakeem is. I really don't follow anybody. Uh, Mostly because honestly, I don't find whatever's going on in the news interesting. Well, I follow Irony. The thing is, I generally don't consider Irony like part of the left because like Irony says so many things that people on the left would hate. Um, Even though like I think Irony is more left than most Marxists are. Uh, he says a lot of things that are just fire. And Irony actually does community work. Unlike the bread tubers, uh, Irony is primarily interested in political philosophy and concrete political philosophy at that. And he's a Hegelian. I mentioned him earlier, but if you want somebody who's like focused on that kind of stuff, he's really good. I learned about Irony like years and years ago, back when I first learned about him when he was on Breaking Brown, and he and Yvette Carnell started the whole show. And you could always tell that Irony was sort of like left. Yvette's show, frankly, like went down the shitter for me, and she started saying some really stupid shit. Uh, and like they're still friends as far as I know. Like they're not enemies or anything. Like they stopped doing the show together mainly because Irony wanted to do his own thing as well. Uh, no, I knew about Irony through Yvette. Uh, and then like through Yvette mentioning stuff about like she's like, oh yeah, some people come in and talk about Marx and Hegel. I'm like, wait a minute, Yvette knows about Marx and Hegel. And then I learned like eventually through watching the shows, I learned that talking to her about those things. And then Irony did an interview with Winfield, and that's when I knew that Irony and Winfield were connected. Yes, Irony knows Winfield. Winfield knows Irony. Irony is like a very radical Winfield. So yeah, he's a really interesting guy. Has some very good takes. He like and like the reason when people ask like who do you follow on the left, I don't put him on the left mainly because it's not that he doesn't put himself on the left, but he doesn't care, and he says a lot of things that he knows are not popular on the left. Like uh, he is hypercritical of like feminism, for example. He thinks that feminism is mostly white woman ploy, uh, you know, to shift politics away from the questions of more pertinence like class and race. And when he puts out his analyses on those things, he's pretty spot on with how historically it really has worked out that way. That feminism uh, generally has just been a way for white women to basically take all the gains that black people gained from the civil rights movements and affirmative action and basically turn everything to be about men. Including the fact that they get to, pretend that it's about women when it's really about white women, because that's just the practicality of it, right? You claim to be under the banner of a universal thing, but in reality, you're only for your own particular brand of it, which benefits, coincidentally, just you and your kind. Because we all know the hypocrisies of liberal feminism, but there are also hypocrisies to radical feminism. There isn't just one feminism. Zizek, during the historical movements, the big philosophical questions come up and not the specifics. Yeah. There's actually a logical reason for this. It has to do everything with the fact that when a crisis occurs and you really have a big enough crisis, a big enough moment, all the things built atop the foundation are shaken. And so the question comes right back down to the foundations. And the foundations at first obviously appear as the more general questions. This is not just for like social things, it's for scientific things. If you look at the way that scientific revolutions have happened, it always happens this way too. You have a crisis, and despite all these systems built on top, all these other assumptions, once things are shaken up enough, the question turns to a foundation, and the question of do we even have the right foundations? And then those are what the very issue of the foundation is. So yeah, that's true. It's not just a Zizek thing. It's been well known in various fields for quite a while. But yeah, other people I follow leftwise, I every once in a while watch videos by Finnish Bolshevik. I mean, some of this is like his history stuff is solid. I mean, what else are you going to say about it? I mean, my friends and I somewhat joke about him because he stands Grover Fur quite a lot, and I mean, I don't reject Grover Fur as strongly as some of my other friends do. But Grover Fur still says some dumb shit, which is just clearly wishful thinking. Like the whole thing, like not a single accusation against Stalin by Khrushchev was true. Literally Stalin did nothing wrong, and then his defense of the show trials, in the 1930s, are questionable. But I do think even with those he has a point. I don't reject his point either. I think that some of those show trials, despite being show trials, were also had legitimate points. But whether they should have murdered the people who were guilty for certain things. I mean, some people were guilty of treason, just straight up. Even they admitted it. And just because they go like, well, I thought I was doing the right thing, doesn't absolve them from being traitors. People like Trotsky. Trotsky deserved what he got. I don't like Trotsky. He was a snake. I don't hide that. But people who were in with his group were traitors to the Soviet Union at a time in which it was a very dangerous thing to do. There were other people in the show trials who were implicated in that. On those people didn't deserve what they got, but that's where like Grover Fur goes too far for some things. He just says all these people are traitors. It was all legitimate. Like these were public trials for exact reason. Even people who weren't from there, said like these seem pretty fair trials. It seems like nobody was coerced to give a false testimony against themselves, etc. So I mean, it's a historical thing. I don't like being honest. I don't quite care because the truth of it is beyond the scope of anybody properly determining with any certainty with what we have, anyways. There's people who believe the conspiracies were real. There are other people who say like, no, we just made up. Uh, it's neither here nor there. Innocent people suffered, guilty people got away. It happens. It's not really something that's important for any current action. A lot of that people who want to go and spend their time defending, Stalin and the Soviet Union, it should be done. It's a worthy endeavor. To me, that's a really bad thing to be wasting your time on. If it's your interest, sure, but it shouldn't be like you shouldn't have a party and then make it part of your party plank. Let's defend the Soviet Union. That's a waste of your time. Let's defend Stalin. That's a waste of your time. Let's defend Lenin. That's a waste of your time. If somebody believes Lenin was the devil, let them believe it. It doesn't fucking matter. Have a party plank or whatever. I would not call it. I would not be basing myself on Leninism or Stalinism or Maoism because that has a really bad vibe to it. Just in the name, it sounds cultish. Chomsky says something on this line, which is stupid, by the way, but there is American consciousness about, you don't want to appear ideological even if you are. You want to phrase things in a way in which you say them as if they were just the case, as if that's just the facts. Because it allows you to speak rhetorically from a standpoint, that hides the ideological nature, right? And like one of my friends disagrees, and he says, "No, we have to be ideological. We have to say, the isms and whatnot." I don't agree. I think that's certain at something you do at a certain point. But if you start that way, especially in the U.S., you don't go very far. What do I think about Chomsky? Chomsky's all right. I mean, his political opinions are, they're common. But that doesn't make Chomsky bad as a person. Doesn't make him bad as the information machine that he was. So, I mean, a lot of Chomsky's books are just that. Like, it's not even a lot of analysis from what I know. It's a ton of information just like laid out for you, and just like bam, bam, bam. This is what happened. Yeah, that's what happened. Okay. I mean, a lot of it, I listened mostly to his lectures back when I was interested in his stuff. I mean, it's just information. It's like the information makes its own argument. He hardly had to make an argument. He just had to lay down the facts. Beyond that, his own theoretical beliefs, I don't care. I don't care that he told people to vote for Hillary. I don't care if he told people to vote for Obama. It doesn't matter to me. I don't. There's nobody that I listen to and go like, wow, I really respect their opinion, and I'm going to do that. I think so. I don't care what others think so much. When somebody says like something like really out of like left field, it just kind of makes you think about like, okay, why do they believe that? But beyond that, I don't know. Yeah, you saw some of my family in the background. Yeah, no, I don't read Chomsky. I haven't listened to Chomsky in a long time. But I don't hate him. I mean, I don't know if like I don't know how I'll feel when he passes away. I mean, I know some people are gonna feel feel bad about it, but I don't know. I don't even know. It's kind of like Zizek. Like I don't really, I don't think I really like care when Zizek dies. Because Zizek's like mostly a meme. Chomsky, like he's, I feel kind of like Chomsky's the same on the left. Like it's mostly a meme. You know, there aren't really a lot of people who like share the beliefs of Chomsky. Uh, even amongst people who they say like, oh, I'm a syndicalist. Well, they're not syndicalist in the same way that Chomsky is. They don't, and they're not because of Chomsky. So stuff like that. He's better than people like Muke and Mexi and Philosophy Tube and ContraPoints. He's better than those people. Uh, but beyond that, I mean, I really don't follow anybody. I hate cult philosophy. Not only because I hate the name of that channel, but honestly, that guy does not know a lot. Like, look, when you know about something and you see other people say something about that something, like Cuck Philosophy's videos on Marx and Hegel, I know that he doesn't know shit. But other people who watch him think that he does, and so they just buy whatever his interpretation is, even though it's a really bad interpretation. And so I hate people who do that before. And they're like, what do you think about Heidegger? What do you think about so-and-so? Have you read so-and-so? And like the answer is no. And that's it. And I'm not going to pretend to you that I know about Heidegger. I'm not going to pretend to you that I know about so-and-so because I don't. Like I know vague things that people have told me and that I've heard and I've read in other books about Heidegger, but do I really know what Heidegger thinks? No, I don't. Am I going to say, well, Heidegger's a Nazi? Well, no, that's stupid. And so if I don't know, I don't know. And me going and reading a secondary book and then going, oh, well, so this is what Heidegger thinks, and then me going and making a fucking video like this is what Heidegger thinks, is disingenuous, like seriously disingenuous. And that's what a lot of these people do. They read other people and then they think that they now understand, and like, oh, I didn't understand Hegel until I read this. um, I hate that. Which, by the way, tells you I hate Philosophy Tube as well, and I also hate ContraPoints, because ContraPoints, amazingly, these people study philosophy and they're all terrible at it. What do I think Marx's critique of Hegel's doctrine of the state? I think Marx's conception of the state is wrong. Just full stop. Like, okay, what Marx calls the state is really not the state, especially not how Hegel conceives it. And when you reconceptualize the state as what Hegel means, and by Hegel, what Hegel means by the state is society, community as such. You get that, like the meaning of communism is just, it's a state. As much as Marx doesn't like the idea, these, you have to have the state. You have to have the apparatus of the state. And the apparatus of the state is the institutions of life. It's the legal system, it's the system of, the guarantees of rights, it's the ideological system, educational system, it's the religious system. It's you put in civic religion as well as personal private religions. You put in all that stuff, and all that stuff is part of the state. Like when Marx is talking about the state, he's talking about the political state. And then Marx says, all the political state is just, the handmaiding of the economy. But that's not true, because if that was true, you would never have had something like social democracy. You would never have had all those kinds of reforms that have happened. it just wouldn't happen. And then the Marxists go and say, oh well, but it was because the bourgeoisie was forced to make concessions. BS, man. Like it's no. I mean that takes away agency from everyone else, who does all the work and to get things done. Like the thing is that the workers gain is not just because the capitalist had to make concessions, as if the capitalist has all the agency in the world and they're the ones who have the absolute decision. No, workers make shit happen, people make shit happen, the electorate makes shit happen. Uh, that's all part of the political state. The political state is not absolutely independent, but is ontologically separate from the economics thing. Um, it's separate on its own level. It's obviously impacted by the economic sphere, but it's not reduced to the economic sphere. It doesn't make any sense, mainly because a lot of what happens in the economic sphere comes through the political sphere. Uh, and so much modernity is economics through politics, rather than politics through economics. Where a lot of the shit that we have, a lot of the monopolies are only because of political influence. A lot of the stupid shit that is so anti-consumer is only because of political influence. Can the state be captured? Yes, but can it be captured both by the bourgeoisie and the proletariat? Yes. Can it also be captured by a different point of view in which it's geared towards something different? Yes. So it's no someone. He's a professor um, who specializes in the philosophy of right, and particularly like Marx's critique of that. Um, and he said that he thinks that Marx was pretty spot on in the critiques of Hegel's philosophy of right. Particularly, he thinks that Marx is. He thinks that the key point and ultimate point of the critique lies in like this very short section of the philosophy of right, where Hegel talks about the regulation of the state and how the electorate functions, and about why Hegel doesn't believe in democracy. He believes instead in representation. And the argument given there is about obviously the representatives should be people who know their stuff. They should be people who have some expertise. Blah blah blah. It's sort of a technocratic thing. And then Marx's critique of that is, well, then, but you don't trust the people, so why would you leave the vote up to the people in the first place? Like, how do you trust that the people could even know who has the expertise to lead them? And that's a very, you can't get away from that. There's this reflexive nature of politics in which it's like who watches the watchers, right? Who keeps track of all the entire political shenanigans and how things go wrong. Ultimately, it is or it isn't all democratic. Even if you mediate the representation, it's ultimately democracy nonetheless. Marx has this famous phrase: "The truth of the state is democracy," meaning that the population, the will of the people, is ultimately the foundation of all states. If the people did not will it, it would not be. If the will, it doesn't matter if the people are repressed into it. Nonetheless, the fact that they bear through it is the seal of their will that it is. Because if they didn't, they would just fight it and they would destroy it, and it wouldn't be no more. It's like you can't take the masses and pretend that they're not there as the ground of the state. So that's a lot of issues. I haven't read it, but I haven't read the philosophy of right either. So I'm talking about hearsay on my part, right? Don't take this as something that you can go and take and say, oh look, I talked to Hegelian and they said this. I didn't. I mean, on a related note, I guess, like talking about the state, I've had this idea like for a long time, and I only got around to getting to it like about last year, where I was putting like actual work to think through it a little bit, and that is like early on when I got into Marxism. I still considered myself a Marxist, not a communist, because I think that label belongs to people who actually do things, as opposed to people like me who just think about things. Uh, you know, uh, Uh, do I have time? I have a lot of time. Am I gonna read Adorno? Uh, Maybe sometime. There's a lot of people. There's a lot of things on my list of to read that range along various interests. I do have a Discord. I don't go on it though because, well, most of it is dead. Honestly, uh, most of the left Discords that I'm on are pretty dead. Honestly, like they've either become meme. They become meme like places, and all that people do is just it's the meme left. It's a bunch of kids, and sometimes you get some of them that are interested in philosophy, but they're not very interested really. They're not willing to put in the effort, and not only that, I mean, like, let's face it, they're teenagers, they're people in their early 20s, and they're Zoomers. That's it's very fitting. They don't have the attention span for it, and they don't really care about the topics, which you should care at a certain point, but that's a matter of personal development. It's one of the things that I don't think that you can do much about. But yeah, we have my friends and I hang out on a Mumble server almost every day, and we talk about things if there's anything to talk about. And I mean, I have my readings of the logic where I did it with a group, and insofar as I could make them ask any questions, I gave explanations to things. There's two sets of those, I think. Yeah, there's two sets. There's one on Mixcloud. There's one on YouTube. Uh, there's a reading of the Phenomenology's preface, uh, and I think like we went up to I recorded up to like chapter 3 when I did that reading group. So there's a lot of talk. That's the kind of stuff you listen to. Then there's my blog. I mean, honestly, all my blogs are examples of me doing the method, both on Left of Wreckage and on Empyrean Trail. So I try to write in a style that shows you the steps that I'm going through. It's mainly a thing that you learn by doing it. It's mainly a thing that you learn by just going through with it. It's like math. You have to practice and practice and practice it by trying to get into the head of Hegel and how he's thinking. And once you do, you get it, and you know how to do it, and you start seeing it everywhere, and you're like, well, this stuff isn't so hard. Because it's actually quite easy once you get a hang of it. I can look at things and go like, oh, okay, like starting here, this is where the basis starts. You get this in this relation. This one builds up to that, and the formality of it is actually really easy. It's a bit harder, obviously, to start fleshing it out and looking at the details of how this concretely happens, but to recognize the pattern and see that it does exist there is actually quite easy. But yeah, all the Hegel servers that I know of, they're pretty dead. I mean, like, they have a lot of members, but it's academic stuff, and so people come in every once in a blue moon, and somebody asks a question, and somebody answers with a page-long response, and then there's silence for another year, and then people join in. Well, yeah, that's how Hegel works. You come in again and again. I mean, I've literally only read like the first 3 chapters of the Science of Logic. I read the first 2 chapters about 3 times, like the first chapter like 6 times, and every time you start from the beginning. Like, it's not like I go and like with my friends, like, hey, let's go back to reading the Science of Logic, and where do we live off? Because you can't do that. I mean, the stuff is so dense, you have to go through it again to refresh your mind about like what's going on in more detail, and in doing so, the way I do it, I don't look at my notes. So, I have a PDF for every single time I read it, because I don't look at my notes every single time, and I make a lot of notes, but I don't go back and look at my notes. Every time I do a reading, it's a fresh reading. That's how Hegel did his shit too. Like literally every time he did his lectures, he would work through it again. You know, he didn't do it through memory. He didn't do it off memory. He would just rework the stuff again. But on the details, he would just rework it again and again and again and again. Which is what made, you know, for advancements and differences across the years in the examples, in the style, in the emphasis of things. I mean, I have this thing that I started, which is very doable, and I have the book to do it. Redoing Hegel's philosophy of history, except this time I put in what Marx put into his material dialectic of history. Because Hegel's actually interesting, and analytic philosophy honestly is boring. I took classes with analytic teachers. I read Marx. Marx made a lot of sense to me. I didn't see what the hubbub of like, oh, Marx is so impenetrable was. And then through Marx, I got into Hegel. And then I got into like a bunch of other stuff like mysticism and whatnot. And I was interested in physics, fundamental physics. So, you know, like it's not that I don't know analytic philosophy. It's just that honestly, yeah, I find it boring. I find that analytic philosophers go about things in the most stupid way. Like the methodology is so abstract and not concrete that I don't see how anybody could seriously care. You know, like it's like people talking about propositional beliefs. I just don't give a fuck about that. Like to me, like Hegel's logic is like the stuff that makes sense. And it's not that there aren't stuff about judgments, and there isn't stuff about propositions, and there isn't stuff about syllogisms in Hegel, same things, such that you don't have to like bring them up again. You know, you don't have to formalize it either, because you just follow arguments content-wise, and there's no question about you know, can you make this inference from here or not? Because you're not working that way. Hegel doesn't work that way. All of his system is a build-up that builds upon itself. So you know you're never questioning whether you've made a leap or not. You can't make leaps. You either moved up a step or you're still working out what's going on in the dialectic. There is no question about if A and G, like how do I get from A to G? You don't get that because you're working in a very systematic fashion of build up. So I very much like that. It also just makes you a lot better of a thinker. I go on or Ask Philosophy, the subreddit. Quite a bit, and most of the people, obviously, it's mostly Anglo, and so most people talk about things there and ask things there from an analytic perspective. And I swear to you, some of these people seem to be brain dead because when somebody from a continental side comes and asks some questions, these people seem to just like have no idea. One, they have no idea that it exists. Two, when people try to say anything about it, like their brain just fries. Even though to me, like I don't have to know about it. Like I don't know very much about Derrida, for example. Somebody comes in, they start talking Derridian jargon. I know about it about as much about it as an analytic does. The thing is, like, there are certain things from just the way that things are talked about that I can discern just because of the structure and dynamic of literally the grammar and the language is being talked about. And I can tell like how the concepts are starting to move and come together, right? And some of these people just seem to be incapable. Conceptual analysis somehow is not something that they can do. I don't know why, because supposedly conceptual philosophy, but I suppose that what they call conceptual analysis and analytic philosophy is not at all what I consider conceptual analysis. Because for me, conceptual analysis is you can think through the thing. Not just like, oh, well, it has these properties and whatnot. No, you can think the thing. If you're talking about space, you don't start talking about the property of space or the definitions of space. You think space. You think extensionality. You think that way. And to me, I don't know, that's always come natural. Like, ever since I got into Hegel, that's come natural. Like, I realized that's kind of why Hegel clicks so well with me. That I've always thought about things in this sort of manner, content-wise. So I'm very comfortable with that. And it seems that the continental side just generally works that way. And you go to classical philosophers, and they also work that way too. Like Plato and Aristotle, they work that way. Like a lot of people try to read them analytically. Sure, you can work that way. A lot of the medieval stuff works that way. So for me, that's just far more interesting. And like I can go into a text from any of these people and take like one concept, and I can just I can write to you an entire fucking essay, like 5,000 words, easy, about how this is into concrete, instantiations, which is actually really, really easy. And it's the main thing you find in the continental philosophers, that they're very good at an essence relation, in which like they can see this thing appear in so many different forms, and you're like, that it's the thing. But Hegel works even better than that, because Hegel can not just go like, oh, it's the thing. It's like, this is how the thing appears in all these other things, and this is why it has to be that way. What do you think about property in Hegel's theory of rights? Property is the most basic right for Hegel. The meaning of property is literally the recognition that something is subject to your will and is considered an embodiment of your will. So, like, I don't know. Right now, like the concept of possession is simply this, that, that it's under my power right now. There is no social aspect to this. Animals possess things all the time. If it's simply the act and the reality of having it. But if this is property, what it means is that any other social being that recognizes property can't do anything with this property. That thing is subject to my will. It is, exclusively something under my will. You cannot deal with it except through my will. And so Hegel actually has an argument which I thought I used to go against because it seemed ridiculous. But Hegel makes the argument that the very first property anybody has is their body. You own your body. And people like, I used to make the argument of, wait a minute, that's idiotic. You don't own your body, you are your body. And the answer is, well, yes and no. Because there are ways in which you use your body very much like you use property. And other people relate to your body in ways that are much the same way that they relate to properties. It's not the same way they relate to you as a person. Anyways, for Hegel, like, property is fundamental. If you get rid of it, you get rid of the very basis in which you could have the rest of the entire system of rights. If you don't have property, a lot of pretty much every other form of right becomes meaningless. Rights of conscience, rights of ethics.
Francisco, we're going to Linda's.
Where?
I don't know where she lives. That's why I have to follow them.
Okay, just send me the
address?
Yeah.
Okay, I will. All right then. And I forgot to offer you food, but you.
That's fine.
Okay then. All right, bye.
Sorry about that. Let's see, just looking at the comments. Why Hegel, Charismatic Philosophy, is it their fault is how these institutions set up today, right? Yeah, no, analytic philosophy is just an institutional thing, right? It's not that people, aren't, are to be blamed entirely for that. Yeah, it's how the subject is constituted. So, it's not blaming analytics for being analytics. Although honestly, like a lot of how analytic philosophy begins is literally because of bad teachers and, you know, bad students. Do I still like Fichte? Yeah, I like Fichte. Yeah, systematic analysis always brings about some truth in any case. Yeah. Can you write me an essay about Adorno? Not right now. The last thing I wrote was about Benjamin. Just check out my blog. I assume that what you want to know is what I think about his negative dialectics, right? I would not agree with Adorno. My real name is many things. And by the way, it's like, it's not that I'm hiding my real identity. It's it. I don't like my name. And like literally nobody in my entire life ever calls me by my legal name, except for people who don't know me. And like my immediate blood family. Everybody else calls me by some other name, nickname, etc. Like, it is so weird to be called by my legal name. Yeah, sure thing, Bob. Oh, you live in Europe? Well, yeah, it's a nice day. You know, it's a really nice day. California has a really nice weather. Actually, Michigan had nice weather too. I assume, you know, like during summer and fall, like there's quite a few beautiful days. Not only that, because you know the seasonal forests over there, really, really, really nice. But here, the beauty of California is that you have a lot of different biomes that are really close by. You know, everything's like within about 2 hours. Deserts, oceans, pine forests, hills. I mean, tons of orchards around here. So yeah, I mean, even like a snow, mountains, everything. Everything's within like, if you're in the Central Valley where I'm at, like everything's about like 2 hours away, literally. So you know, it's pretty nice. For the most part, when I went to Michigan, I didn't miss it because I didn't go anywhere anyways. You know, because once I got my car, I mean, I got a used car, so you know, there's only so much trust I can put into you know, my vehicle, honestly. Yeah, so you know, I wasn't about to go anywhere alone. You know, driving like 2 hours here and there. You know, as much as I like to go outside and you know just walk around and do photography and shit. So I didn't go anywhere. So it was no different to me. My parents were like, "Well, how do you like you know? How do you like Detroit?" And I'm like, "It's the same to me." I mean, like you're stuck at home most of the time. You don't go anywhere. Uh, all my friends are online. I don't really hang out with like people outside. So it's all the same to me. You know, wherever the heck I go in the country, it's literally the same. That's my view on drugs. I think that the science and the facts are in that criminalization is just not something that works. You know, like we can talk about the morality of things, and sure, morally, one can say that you know that people who get into drugs and whatnot, you know, they're doing wrong to their bodies and to their consciousness. but ethically there's fuck all you can do about that works. So it seems that the general utilitarian thing is simply just accept that this is a fact of what people are, something that people are going to do. You might as well just make it as least problematic as possible. Just make it as least of a health hazard and risk as possible. And once people are ready to get the fuck out of it, you have institutions and ways for that people can actually get out of it. There's no point in ruining the lives of people who are honestly already ruined. So there's that. I mean, when you get to like stuff like psychedelic drugs, legalize them, have centers for people to go and do them safely. You know, integrate those into like psychotherapies, because they've been shown, ever since they were discovered, they were shown to be incredibly potent with regard to helping people with psychological issues of various kinds, conscious and unconscious. So definitely something that just legalize it. Make possession legal. Sure, make dealing illegal. Like, don't make the sale of them legal. Like, still keep that underground. But if people are gonna get them, let them have them. What was it? Yeah, going back to, this was like a long sequence, but this brings me back to what I was starting on like a bit ago. Sure, yeah. This goes into what I was talking about. Okay, so back when I got into first got into Marx, like about a year later, uh, I had like my own depressive break. It's when I fell into like my deepest depression. This was when I was 22. Yeah, 22 was when it happened. So I think I read Marx Capital for the first time back in when I was 21 in the summer. In that time, I also got interested because of that in some tangential ways, partly because of physics, partly because of philosophy. Ended up falling into the rabbit hole of mysticism. And from the very beginning, I had a very strong notion that the whole anti-religious, anti-spiritual, materialist trend of like communism, Marxism, etc., was really stupid. Because there's really no contradiction. Like all the way since then, I just had this notion of like these two things go very well together. In fact, it's amazing that they don't empirically come together, because in essence they are so coincidentally the same. One of them is, and from the very beginning, I started writing this essay, which I never finished back then, about and like this is before I was doing my blogs and whatnot. I used to write private essays and notes and shit, just for my own, just to develop my own ideas. And so I think like somewhere about years down the line that I started developing this into like over time, about an essay in which I was trying to talk about the apparent contradiction, but the reality of the coincidence of spirituality and socialism, and how these two perspectives actually go together. In which the first thing I noticed was spirituality is a personal endeavor for the most part, which has social consequences, and socialism is a social endeavor which should, in principle, have personal consequences as well. And so these things converge, at least in that abstraction. Concretely, they should also converge, mainly because in spirituality the whole thing is about gaining awareness of and compassion for other people, gaining knowledge of like that everybody's going through a struggle, and that there's personal struggles. People, some people have some very difficult lives, etc., etc. They're dealing with things in their own way, and that being able to stand back, self-regulation, self-control, self-understanding, And those things are not in any way antithetical to social understanding and social action. So, anyways, I think last year was the point at which like I took that material that was unfinished and I said, okay, finally I'll just rework it, away from the mess that it had become. Mainly because it was originally supposed to be a lot more about like going to the theory of society and economics, and also a more harsh criticism on spiritual woo shit. And I kind of repurposed it and put out a first half, which I called the Society of Individuality. The Socialism's Wreckage blog. You can check that out. You can still just go to the front page and scroll down a bit, and it's right there. It's not that long. I think it's only about like 3,000 words or so. I think usually my stuff is like about 5,000, so it might just be 5,000. But anyways, my point there is just to go and like say, okay, I'll repurpose this and say like the point of both socialism and spirituality generally is to create a free individual. What they mean by that is obviously different according to the different strands, but they can at least agree on that much, that the point is to create a free individual. Part of what a lot of the left forgets now is that to be a free individual, you gotta be somebody who's solid in themselves. You gotta have a solid internal basis, and to make that solid internal basis, it really does take spiritual work. It takes a lot of self-reflection, a lot of self-analysis, a lot of self-understanding, a lot of standing back from the immediacy of whatever you're undergoing, whatever you're feeling, and thinking about, okay, what is actually actionable in this, what is reasonable in this, what can I actually do about this, and asking deeper questions about what's the point of all this, what do I actually want out of all that I'm doing. And with a lot of that comes responsibility. You have to believe in your own responsibility for your capacity to do anything about these things. You can't change the world, but you can change your perception of the world and how you deal with things. It's good old Stoicism, the ancient Buddhism. It's this whole idea of self-development. So you got to develop yourself. And a lot of people on the left don't do that. A lot of people on the left just jump straight into the social stuff. Even though they're honestly mentally children, they throw fits. They have a soft skin. They can't handle criticism. They don't know how to deal with even positive criticism. And that's a very obvious problem. Yeah, it creates a lot of pointless problems for a lot of shit. So that's the main gist of that. Like the left has forgotten that aspect of personal development and responsibility and just personal regulation, in which you got to find your center, because once you have a center, it doesn't fucking matter what the rest of the world says, right? You'll know who you are, what you stand for. Whatever some dumbass on the street says about you, you're not gonna fucking care. Whatever some dumbass with a PhD says about you, you're not gonna fucking care. I mean, like, people make fun of me all the fucking time. Like, they're like, oh, look, AW doesn't believe in relativity. He doesn't believe in, what Einstein proved. He thinks he knows better than Einstein. Well, yes, I do know better than Einstein in some shit. Because I know. I can make a whole straight argument for all the things that I find questionable about relativity and why I don't believe it. And why I am certain these things, are just not true. There are misunderstandings of theoretical shit, blah, blah, blah. And he doesn't believe in Einstein. Well, I have reasons. Very good reasons. They're not even reasons that they're reasons both that I've come up with and reasons that other people, who are equally in the field have come up with. So, it's not just like me in a vacuum and I'm the only person who doesn't believe these things. No. But, I've known some people who have studied physics, and I've had arguments with them, and they're like, you're a fucking weirdo, but yeah, okay, you have some points. But am I bothered by that? No, not really. I mean, like, the people online have made fun of me for those things, like, whenever I've said anything. Like, I've gone on, like, once I went on Reddit, and, like, people, like, I was just tired that day of the usual circle jerking. There was something about Einstein on the front page, and I'm like, okay, look, people, I know you believe all this stuff, but here's, like, all these other things that are questionable about it. and people just immediately jumped on me and downvoted me, like, how like do you have a PhD? Well, no, I don't have to have a PhD. Well, do you know the mathematics? Well, no, it's not a question of mathematics. We're not discussing that. And like, well, what authority do you have? Well, the authority of reason. I mean, look, if you don't understand me, that's fine. Totally understandable. Totally understandable. You don't understand me, fine. But just shitting on me because I don't believe what you believe, because that's just what everyone believes. I don't care. Sure, you gotta have thick skin, but it's not just thick skin. There's like the kind of thick skin of people who are just thick and don't accept that they could possibly be wrong, and there's like the kind of thick skin that comes from the fact that what to expect when you say certain things. Why other people think certain things, and why they're likely not to believe you and like to think that you're a loon or whatever. But you know what you know how you know it, and you know that you know it, and so you have no problems with it. I have no problems with it, so that's fine. I have some ethical views and political views that people find fucking bizarre. uh, they go like, oh, you believe in it's like this or that. Well, yeah, and fine. You can make fun of me, I don't care. you know it's that kind of thing. Like, and I feel comfortable with that, mainly why? Because I have that spiritual foundation, cognitively and just personally. I've learned to just like, I'm on the fringe. That's what I am. That's probably what I'll always be. And I'm comfortable with it. Whether people believe me, whether people follow me, I don't care. I don't want them to. Like, if they share my ideas, great. If they understand them, even better. But just because they think as a majority, I'm wrong. Whatever. Whatever, man. So you got to build up that internal structure for yourself. You're strong in what you are and what you stand for. And then the second side of that is, of course, that just being strong in what you are and what you stand for materialize out of nothing. The whole spiritual movements, general belief, like New Age is kind of the poster child nowadays for that. But even the more reasonable stuff, like Buddhism and whatnot, you got to find your own center and, just forget about the world, do what you can with yourself. Okay, fine. You do that, you come together as, as an individuality. You now understand why you believe what you believe, how you believe it. You wholeheartedly assert that you believe it. And then what do you do about it? Do you just fucking sit on your hands and go like, oh, I am who I am? Well, no. That's none of these things ever say that that's what you do. You don't just keep it to yourself. And there's people like, well, everybody has the intuition, rightly, that somehow this has to have some further effect beyond just you. But the question is, how is this supposed to have a further effect beyond just you? Because the main thing people fall back onto is like, okay, well, I'm just going to live a righteous spiritual life. I'm going to be strong in what I believe. I'm going to stand up for all those things. But I only do that as an individual. I don't join groups. I don't engage in politics, because all that is just it's just superficial. It doesn't really change anything. You got to change the person, right? The question, of course, comes up: well, why is it that most people aren't going for these ideas in the first place? What is it that makes it so that you and other people, are in disagreement as to what the nature of all this stuff is? Yeah, and the question comes up, and Marx has the answer. Well, it's social conditions, dummy. It's the material conditions. It's the way of life, dummy. And in all of that is implicated the entire state apparatus of society, from education, the ideology, the media, the ethos of the people, the general, values, etc. And if you really are a spiritual person who learns a spiritual lesson, and you want other people to learn them as well, you have to be worried, and you have to care about the fact that people are being made to be in a certain way that makes it very hard for people to come to that realization that you have come up to with. And so the second half that I've been working on is basically on that. It's just talking about, like, spiritual people need to come together, with socialist people, and realize that this is a common project. The point of a social society for me is to create spiritual individuals. People who are very strong in themselves, people who are very certain of themselves, who know who they are, who will what they are, uh, consciously, cognitively, emotionally free. But you can't create that society by waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. You have to be doing something in the world that starts generating more people like this, and you can't wait to generate those people like that until they're adults. You got to start with kids. That's the reality. Kids are a huge key to creating change in society. And so like the whole educational system, blah blah. People are making fun of it. Marianne Williamson. You're like, oh look, she believes all these other things. Out of all the people running, Marianne Williamson was probably the most radical of them all. More radical than Bernie, more radical than Tulsi, mainly because she was talking about the ground social issue. She was also talking about the economic issue, but if your aim is to have a revolution, which requires a cultural revolution, you really have to be talking about the things that Marianne Williamson was talking about. You gotta get the institutions into that process of subject creation, because if you don't, you're gonna fail. You're gonna lose. You're gonna have exactly the same thing that happened to social democracy across the globe happen again. You have a golden era for about 20 years in which you're creating what? Capitalist individuals, whose values are what? Capitalist values. Whose notions of freedom are what? Capitalist notions of freedom. If you don't change that, of course things are going to fall apart pretty easily, pretty quickly. You're going to have the people who fought for that, their kids are going to reap the rewards, and those kids are just going to turn around and say, well, I learned that, all this stuff is superfluous. I learned that, it's like the economy works a certain way, like we should be doing this and that. And what are they going to do? They're going to act based on those things, so if you don't change that entire apparatus of subject creation, good luck having the woke society, who everybody goes, awakens to the reality of, the spiritual dimension of humanity. Both, you can be talking about it in like some weird metaphysical way. You could also be talking in just the very mundane way of, society. Just if you're somebody who believes in anything beyond yourself, you're a spiritual person. Because you as the immediate being are not to the end of the world. Sorry, I disconnected there. So it seems that I'm back. Anyways, so you're not the end of the world, So you do things and you act towards things for something greater than yourself, and you're certain that even if you die, things continue on. So you need that kind of conviction. So yeah, that generally addresses my thoughts on the major source of depression for most people is social. Most people are not clinically depressed. As a matter of fact, it's questionable whether people who are clinically depressed are themselves really clinically depressed. I've heard a lot of alternative stuff about this kind of stuff. The science is sketchy on everything. I've seen studies talking about how, in the if you did a meta analysis of the chemical industry, the chemicals used for, antidepressants. One, the current meta-analyses show that they're not very useful to begin with. Two, apparently if they showed all the trials in which they failed, apparently the result would be that these things do nil. And that's it. There's been some, I've watched recently, has many patents basically, I forget what the machine is called. I don't know if you've ever seen those like little electropad machines that, they use for pain relief. And this guy has this place that he deals mainly with people with long-term pain. And he says that he just has pain. They're depressed, obviously. But it also just happens to be, sometimes he just gets people who will have different kinds of long-term disabilities and pains, and they're depressed for different reasons. And he's had these different contraptions and different things that he's worked on, and he claims that he got this information through, angels and dreams and whatnot. You may want to believe that or not. But he claims that, you know, for like about 90% of the cases that have come to his institution, he's cured them virtually of pain as well as depression. You know, with no chemicals used, you know, just literally like electrodynamic frequencies, etc. So who knows? You know, there's a lot of different causes for this shit. Uh, it's weird. And it's weird, and you know, people who fall into it know it's weird because you know that you fall into it, and you know consciously, cognitively that it just doesn't make sense. You know that the way you're acting doesn't make sense. You know that there's certain things that you should be doing, but you just don't have the will. You know, somehow the will is just not there, and even when you get the will to do it, you know, the reaction that you get to it is just, you know, it's just not there. Will you ever stop being depressed if you live a depressing life? Well, obviously not. I mean, like, I think one of the things that helps with it is, you know, just finding a reason to live. Really, you know, living is not about being happy exactly. Uh, I can't say that I'm happy most of the time. Not enjoying. I'm not enjoying life most of the time. But life is bearable, and you know, I do get joy out of doing a little bit of things, creative things that I do. And I think that's about you know, when you have nothing, that's about as much as you can try to do. You know, try to develop some kind of creativity, even if it is a creativity that expresses nothing but your negativity. You know, that in itself is positive. Uh, Geiger, for example, or Giger, that's the artist, German artist Giger, you know, famous for aliens and whatnot. A lot of his art was born from the fact that, you know, he was trying to find some way to relieve himself of the nightmarish visions, you know, that he did see those things, you know, and it tortured him, and so, you know, he would apparently cook himself up to not sleep because he was didn't want to see those things, and he also did his art uh, to get those things out of his head so that he would stop seeing them, more or less. You know, it seems to have lived a pretty depressive life, you know, tortured and depressive life, but nonetheless, you know, he did quite a lot of creation and creativity, and you know, and he found some satisfaction uh, in that. Swiss, yeah. So, you know, I think that if you're depressed, one of the best things to do is find some way to be creative, find something to be your passion. And of course, you know, when you're depressed, the problem is you don't have passion, right? Uh, I don't know, like just do it. That's what I did, honestly. Like when I started getting out of depression, you know, at the depths of it, I was suicidal. Uh, and things that I ever want to do. And so I bought myself an actual legitimate DSLR camera because I had a shitty little digital snap and shoot, but I couldn't do all the things that you know, I wanted to do on that. You know, it didn't look that great. It didn't look that cool, and you know, I just wanted to try photography. You know, so I spent 800. Put down $800, bought myself a camera, bought myself a bunch of shit for the camera. You know, just went with it. And I didn't know what the fuck to do, so I just went around, took pictures of flowers, took pictures of clouds, took pictures of stuff just to see what looked cool, what didn't look cool, you know, what framing kind of stuff, you know, might be cool. Started playing around with Photoshop because, you know, now I actually had photos worth editing. And with that, you know, slowly but surely, and I mean like slowly, in like about 2 months, you know, I was in love with it. You know, I was actively going outside, and I wanted to take pictures and try cool shit and, you know, see what I can do. Um, and I had fun with it. And you know, that was a nice way to uh, be creative and be positive. You know, in regards to the rest, what was going on the rest of my life. And I wasn't doing it with its hope of becoming famous or, you know, becoming a photographer or anything. I was just doing it as a hobby. And I made a Flickr, and I, you know, started, you know, liking a lot of other things. And I made some connections through that. I made some photography friends and whatnot. Uh, so yeah, so you can also get, you can literally also go to that and make social connections, meet individuals, etc. Um, after that, a lot of the pictures of, well, whenever I can, all the pictures that I use in my blogs are my pictures, my photos that I took, and I have quite a lot of photos that I really really like. I have a Flickr, and most of the photos that I love, and everything I posted there is on there. And so and I look at those and I say, like, you know what, I've seen stuff being sold, for hundreds and thousands, hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars, that looks just like mine. And that's one way to increase your own self-confidence in things. When you see that you can actually do things that other people find valuable, and you go, I can do that. That's a massive boost to your confidence, to your self-esteem. I'm someone who has problems with self-esteem, and but seeing doing things, just doing things, and just having fun. I have a Snapchat, but I literally only use it to talk to like two people who have no other form of communication except Snapchat. I mean, just, you can talk to me on Twitter, you can talk to me on email, you can talk to me on Facebook. Uh, my Flickr is linked on my Instagram. And my Instagram is Seawolf underscore AW. Am I a class reductionist? No, I'm not a reductionist of any kind. But anyways, to continue with that, I also ended up getting into writing with my blogs when I read the stuff with my friends, and they're like, I don't know, like, people do that. So I did. I decided, okay, well, if I do that, I'll put out something that I think is actually of interest and that I think is useful. So the first thing I published was my dialectics introduction. And after that, I just kept on working on different things that I thought, would build upon that with the Hegel stuff. And now on my blog, I have something like, I don't know, what is it? Close to 50, basically 50 essays equivalent. And those are about the equivalent of a chapter in some book, 5,000 words to 10,000 words per blog post. And yeah, there's a lot of editing to go back to, and clarifying and rethinking certain things. But nonetheless, I put them out, and my blog is, you know, fairly popularizing. I get quite a steady set of views, like 50 views a day, 50 visitors a day usually. Even my Left of Wreckage blog gets like about 20 people a day, which kind of surprises me. And seeing the response to my essays, both from just regular people, students, as well as even professors who praised my stuff, said that it was actually very good. That certainly has helped my esteem, and so that certainly helped me write even more. And so that's kind of how I deal with depression. And I mean, also, just, I'm a curious person. I like to know a lot of shit. Um, a lot less curious now, honestly, because most of it I've gotten bored of, since I don't consider it very important and to lead very much anywhere anymore. Boxing I find very boring to watch. MMA is more interesting to watch. Uh, every once in a blue moon, I go on and just watch highlights of fights and whatnot. But I don't follow I don't follow it. Well, there's a lot of stuff. there's a lot of stuff that it's fun to do, not fun to watch. Most sports, I think, are fun to play, but not fun to watch. Hegel's aesthetics. Spectre Americana. Hey. Spectre Americana. Spectre. Are you the one who asked a question on my blog recently, like this week? I haven't responded to it yet. But your image makes me think you were. Anyways, Hegel's aesthetics. No, so it wasn't you. Never mind then. Interesting stuff. It's not as complex as you might think. Not the basics, anyways. Of course, the details are always kind of well detailed. Like for example, when you get into his stuff with music, it's detailed in a very theoretical way. I think Pinker's translation lacks because it's a fucking horrible translation. Compare that to Miller's translation, and I don't know how you can read it. I literally read it. I read the first 2 chapters of the Phenomenology with a professor who specializes name. Either way, we tried reading the Pinkard official one, you know, the Cambridge official publication, and the way that he structures the sentences is so horrible that neither I nor that professor could understand what the fuck it was saying. Then we turned to the Miller translation, and the Miller translation was perfectly clear as to what was going on. And then I checked out the free version that Pinkard had put out before the official publication, and that one was also pretty easy to make sense of. And like, it's the worst translation out of all the new translations. Like the Inwood, I don't like the Inwood because like they changed existence to being there. I don't know why. Like that kind of shit infuriates me, just because like they're putting out a publication just to put out a publication. Like, you know, like, how can we make it different from the other one? Oh, let's change, you know, this word to, you know, a different word. Why? No fucking reason. You know, it just fucking annoys the hell out of me. But the Inward translation is all right. I still prefer the Miller. I checked out the Fuss and Dobbins translation. Read out of them all, mainly because they translate Hegelese to a more readable English, but by doing so, they get rid of the Hegelian spirit. But then again, I mean, like, that's kind of a question of, like, you know, what's the purpose, right? The Fuss-Dobbins translation is a purpose of readability, getting you into the text, as opposed to getting you into Hegel's mind. Because if you want to get into Hegel's mind, I mean, you try to just read Hegel, and then you realize that, you know, things are fast and loose, and that's what makes it so great. But, you know, as an introduction, like, of course, you know, the Fuss and Dobbins is not bad, but I definitely do think the Pinkard translation is the worst. Cyborgization of humanity, maybe, but if that happens, let me tell you, I think it's one of the worst things that could possibly happen to us. I think that's humanity taking a really bad turn that is going to lead to some very, very bad consequences, which might not be something that you can back off of in the big scope. Have I read Adorno's aesthetic theory? No, I have not. Uh, what's Hegel's most important work? All of them. All of them are important. You know, somebody might tell you, it's the science of logic. Well, the science of logic is, if you were to lose all the works by Hegel, the science of logic is probably the one that you don't want to lose the most, mainly because it's the critique of thinking. So, you know, like it's the core of how to do everything else. But you at least want to keep, if everything was lost, you would at least want to keep at least some fragments of the logic deployed, or at least the outlines of the logic deployed, because then you understand how to do it yourself. If you understand the logic, you will know how to do it yourself, and you can redo what Hegel did, not exactly as he did it, but afresh. And like that's the point of it all. You have to do it afresh. You know, the Hegelian corpus is something that is not something that you're supposed to keep going back to and going like, what did Hegel mean? Because Hegel himself didn't do that. Hegel himself just kind of went. He did look at what other people meant in the past, and he was mainly looking at their concepts. And what he was looking for was searching for words and terms that were close enough to what he had in mind and for the build-up that he had in mind. And then after that, you can do it. Hegel's aesthetics doesn't really follow the same patterns of metaphysical dialectics. Actually, it does. The problem is that the lectures are not actually dialectical. They're not set up in the same way that the logic is set up to be purely about the conceptual movements. The conceptual movements are there, but they're not explicit. Like, for example, I started writing and I didn't finish the exposition for the first chapter on nature, natural beauty. And there, the way Hegel functions, he goes about it formally, very formally. So, and that's what happens with all lectures, that the dialectical movement is a very formal movement. You know, you can recognize it, but the actual movement is not present. In order for that to become explicit, you have to work through it yourself and think about it. Because, for example, in the philosophy of history, the movement from India to China, or rather China to India, does not make sense. Hegel tells you some reasons as to why this makes sense and why the whole structure, you know, follows, but he doesn't explain it. But if you look at certain things, you do understand that it does actually follow, and it actually follows very solidly. But it's not what Hegel says that makes this explicit. So yeah, the lectures on fine art, they're dialectical in the proper sense. It's just that everything that isn't Hegel's books suffers the problem of not being explicit. What does it have to do with metaphysics? It's all metaphysics. Like, there's some passages where Hegel tells you what he defines as metaphysics. And metaphysics, literally, for Hegel, is categories. Metaphysics is just simply the infinite form of the finite. And so, since everything in Hegel has to do with that, everything is metaphysics. I mean, politics is metaphysics. Nature is metaphysics. Like the meaning of metaphysics is not really the abstraction of metaphysics. For Hegel, everything is ontological, everything is metaphysical. Yeah, that's not what we usually mean by metaphysics, but it also is what we mean by metaphysics. Like it's not something physical; it's something beyond the physical. Um, it's not something immediately concrete, but it's something abstractly concrete. I mean, like there's that. I mean, so oh, but he is. He's interested in the substance of what everything's made of. It's the He's interested in the absolute. It's just that what we mean by substance and everyday common sense of substance. I have a blog on this. Like his meaning of subject and his meaning of substance. Like there's a very technical sense to it. There's also a very common sense to it. The common sense of it, so the substantial, is Hegel wants to know what endures. What is ultimately the thing that endures in all of these changes and all these determinations? What is the thing that's there? And of course, it's not one thing. It's many things, but it's just not many things. It's also the one thing that makes all these things many things. So, if you put in like the sort of Heideggerian phrasing of the being of beings, well, the being of beings is the total being that makes beings. The absolute is the system of reality. So that's the substance. And you know who else says that? Well, Spinoza. That's what Spinoza said about substance. Who says that about being? Parmenides said that about being. So it's very much metaphysical. It's just like metaphysics is not the end all be all of the word. Like there is no word, there is no term that captures the entire meaning of everything. Schopenhauer is not that interesting to me. Literally all the people that I've ever seen that are interested in Schopenhauer are interested merely because of their anti-humanist depressive leanings. And why that is the most interesting thing about Schopenhauer to people, like antinatalism. Much less so the will, even though I think that's the more interesting thing. As far as like his system, I don't find his. I haven't read very much of his. He is a great writer, he's fun to read, but I don't think he has much of this stuff that's really insightful. Like I'd much rather look at Kant than look at Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer just seems like a step back to pre-Kantianism, despite how much he says he's rooting for Kant. To me he just steps back into pre-Kantianism. So I don't really see a sense in reading Schopenhauer. Why? Does he have a better epistemology? Well, Kant already destroyed epistemology. After Kant, the German idealists don't do epistemology anymore. It's pointless. What ends up happening after Kant is people instead follow the line of the transcendental logic, in which like they want to think about the concept and logic of being. You see Kant as a step back from Hume? I don't think so. The reason Kant is better than Hume is because Kant purifies epistemology. Rather than taking an epistemology, Kant takes the standpoint of epistemology as such. So with Kant, you finally get the true turn to real modernity. The people say modernity starts with Descartes, and Descartes turns the question away from ontology first to epistemology first. But that's not true. Oh, he fails. But he does something that Hume didn't do. Hume is still stuck with, with Descartes, Hume, and who's the other people? The rationalists and the empiricists at that point. The problem is, they don't really start with empiricism first. They still assume ontology. They still base ontology. They still base cognition on ontology. So they pretend to not be ontology first, to not talk about being first, to talk about how you can know being by presupposing the ontology. Whereas Kant is the first one to finally not do that. He's the first one to finally say, okay, we're going to just reverse the whole thing how it should have been from the first place. Instead of ontology first, we're going to do epistemology first. What we know and how we know is going to determine what we know, rather than assuming there is an ontology and then we're asking, like, how do we know it? Does Kant succeed in the project that he builds from that? Of course not. There's a bunch of problems, but he changes the question completely. And then after he does that, the whole question of epistemology disappears in the tradition. Immediately following that, everybody else is responding to, like, okay, well, that makes sense. But then why are you talking about the ontology stuff of the thing itself in the first place? That doesn't make any sense. You think contemplation should come first? I don't know. What do you mean by contemplation? Like the German idealist answer to that is not epistemology or ontology first. It's logic first. And logic is logos. Logic is the being of cognition and the mode of cognition, which maps directly. Yeah, but see, if you say observation first, you already have the subject-object split, which was part of what made Kant fail, because Kant tries to do epistemology first and yet still assumes that there is an object aside from the subject, an independent object. So you can't do observation first because you're still presupposing things, and that's the problem that the German idealists deal with. They're all about, you cannot presuppose anything, because otherwise you're going to run into problems. Seems like what you favor, right? You're going to like a Husserl, where it's like instead of having all these other questions, we're just going to start with the what's going on with consciousness. What is going on with phenomena. But the same problem arises. You still have presuppositions about structures and ontologies. Why is being indeterminate? Well, because to have difference, you have to have, well, different things. If you don't have different things, you don't have difference. If you don't have difference, you don't even have a thing. Because to have a thing, you have to have things. You don't have things, you don't have a thing. If you absolutize immediacy as being, there's no way to pick out anything. There is no determination to be made. It's like when you say I have nothing of that sort, I have no mediations, that's also counting you into it. It's counting your consciousness into it. You're saying I'm not even going to hold myself apart from it. So that's why immediacy in being is indeterminate, because there is no way to make determinations when there is no difference. There is no negation. What social role does developing these philosophical questions play? A lot and a little. All right, see ya, Protsky. Generally, it doesn't do anything in the middle of society, for example. A lot of these questions don't immediately have any social consequence whatsoever. I mean, for example, philosophy of science exists. It's a legitimate field. People have legitimate questions about it. They've been discussing these for decades. And yet it has no impact on science, except it does. These things take a long time. Like, philosophy is a long-term trickle down into the consciousness of people. It takes a long, long time for to take general hold. Like, things that we take for granted nowadays simply were not conceived back in the good old days. Back in Greece, there was no notion of consciousness. There was no notion of free will. These are just inconceivable questions. Those start coming up in the Middle Ages. Thanks to the whole Christian problems of responsibility and damnation and salvation, etc. Uh, that's why those concepts start to come in, and people start to trickle them down slowly but surely, into the common consciousness. The idea of rights took a long time to trickle down to the general idea of people. Uh, but it's will most of philosophy enter the public consciousness at some point? No, because I think most of philosophy is garbage. Most of the philosophy being produced today is utterly useless stuff. It's going to go nowhere. A lot of this formal logic shit, it's going to go nowhere. It's useful for programming. That's about it. It's and even then, it's not fully used for programming. But programming takes what it wants from it and goes its own way. So a lot of these things, yeah, they don't matter. The fundamental questions, though, the stuff about being, the stuff about is materialism true, is idealism true, etc. It actually does matter. Not in the philosophical linguistic sense that disingenuous in people. You cannot pretend that the scientific revolution and the turn towards materialism ontologically and the general atheism of the population over time does not have consequences about how they live their life and how they relate to each other. It totally does. People like me having debates with other people around me, does that matter immediately? Well, no. Do other people that listen to us, who don't fully understand what's going on, but get the gist of, what the importance is, matter? Yeah, they start mattering more. They're the teachers, they have kids, they have family, they have friends, they have discussed with other people, and ideas spread. And when we're talking about ideas, we're not talking just concepts in your head. It's like Christianity. Christianity spread, and the spread of Christianity is not the belief in Jesus. The spread of Christianity concretely means a certain form of life and a certain way of conceiving the world and a certain way of treating each other. So yeah, those things, they matter. It's just they don't matter immediately. You're not gonna get something like Platonism arising and like immediately taking over and evidence. All of a sudden, everybody becomes a Platonist. Although, admittedly, that does happen. It takes like there are ideas that rise like within a decade. They are like the common household belief. I mean, the idea of man as machine, like, spread pretty quickly. Like, it's the common belief nowadays among scientists, among even the regular person. First it was man as the basic machine mechanism. Then it's man as the computer now. And then, nowadays where, we start getting into like man as information, etc. You disagree with what? Yeah, you gotta take into mind that like you guys are like 10 seconds or so behind me. So oh, man not machine. Oh, man's not a machine. It's not even it's not even just organism. Although it's heading there. With the way things are going and the way people see themselves, it's heading there. That's why I said that earlier. Somebody's like, what do you think about people becoming cyborgs and whatnot? I don't think that's a good thing. I think it's literally the bad fate of humanity. If we go there, and it does seem that we're going there. Yeah, humans are conscious matter, or rather, matter is a mode of consciousness. That means it can work either way. Climate change. Well, climate change is going to happen. There are natural cycles of climate change, and then there's just like the idea of strong emergence is bullshit. Literally, it's magic. Like, it doesn't mean anything. Like, Hegel has emergence, backwards emergence, uh, where what emerges happens to have always already been there and actually turns out to be the explanation in the ground for the things from which it emerges. That's how Hegel works. Hegel has something like, say, space, and as you work through space, you realize that space only makes sense through spaces. So you get indeterminate space through determinate space, through the dimensions, and then you get like the sense of space really only making sense through time. And then you get time only making sense through space. And so you have this chicken and the egg problem in which you're like, wait a minute, what emerged from what? And the reality is, neither of them emerged from either of them. Actually, they both emerge from this thing called place, which is the ground of the unity of time and space for Hegel. And then from place, you get motion, and you realize, wait, motion and place actually arise from this thing called matter. And then matter actually arises from these things called material bodies. It's no more worrying than anything else about climate change, by the way. It's globally, you see everyone is really globally, most governments aren't taking it seriously. It seems like the most serious government on this is China, and it makes sense because China has always been about the long game. I mean, China's history is about like dynasties and whatnot. Not always, but that's always been the conscious aim for a long while. In which like you're trying to aim to have a stable state for as long as you can, to have a stable everything for as long as you can, everything in place. So China takes it seriously. Solar energy, wind energy, alternative energies, etc. So out of everyone in the world, old man's gone. Be quiet. Hey, come on. Be quiet. What if you're not a statist? Well, I don't know. If you're not a statist, you have no solution for climate change, anyways. Literally, the only solution right now is a global solution, and it's not going to happen. Like it's not going to happen until it's too late. And either way, as I was saying, it's not talked about a lot, but it's true. There are natural climate cycles. We're about in a trajectory in which like we're due for one anyways. Regardless of our carbon emissions, regardless of the CO2, shit happens. The sun has a lot to do with a lot that goes on Earth. The sunspot cycles, but then there's like these really long cycles. I think they're called Kondratiev or something. Long wave cycles. Too late to stop the catastrophes of what's coming with climate change. That's what I'm talking about. Like in the US and the other places have been talking about this shit long before it was even common consciousness of people going like, oh, well, we got to stop CO2 emissions. They had been talking about the coming water wars, and like they've been talking more and more about it like ever since. They're like, we're running out of our population expands. We're running out of the ground reservoirs of water. We've already hit that in California for a while because the extensive farming being done is crazy. The farming that is done here is very water intensive, and so people just drill holes into the water table and deplete it, and they don't give it any rest so that like it can replenish. Beyond that, the population growth makes it so that water is going to become a more and more limited thing. And as As climate change starts happening, both places get cold and places get warmer. The question of where are we gonna get the water? Like if it gets too hot for the regular places where it's at now, a lot of water comes from like the snow cover on mountains. If those get too warm, well, there goes that yearly reservoir of water. There's a lot of stuff that goes into the runoff. Like if you just if there's no way to maintain that, uh, it's shitty. Like it's as if you had like a fraction of that water, because the fact that it gets kept in snow makes it a lot more manageable. It makes it so that a lot less of that ends up being empty runoff. So there's a lot of talk about water wars and resource wars of that sort, um, and that talk has not stopped. It's only intensified over time, and nobody's talking about it. Nobody on the left talks about it. People talk about the Green New Deal. Nobody's talking about the fact that like there's a lot of shit that we've done ecologically that is very hard to reverse now. Not only have we destroyed forest, desertification is something real that's expanding. Deserts are expanding. And the reason they're expanding is not because there isn't water. It's not that the water stuff has fallen. Um, so in some places it has, but the main explanation for that is actually we destroyed the ecosystem, and the ecosystems were in place to maintain the quality of the soil, to keep it from desertifying. Um, Involves a lot with what we did with the containment of wildlife, the broad fencing of nature, which stopped a lot of we stopped a lot of the natural animals that would roam and graze and maintain the prairies and grasslands, etc. We destroyed a lot of that, so a lot of that is gone. So the whole climate change thing it's inevitable. It's inevitable both because of natural circumstances. It's also inevitable because we definitely accelerated, not just with CO2, but with everything else we've fucking done to ecosystems. A Green New Deal is not going to fix that, even if the rest of the world went with it. Do I think it's an extinction event for humans? No, I don't. Also, to answer your previous thing, Spectre, so there's something more than relational competition. Yes. Would socialism help with it? Uh, yeah. I think that if you're going to survive with a society that retains a decent standard of living, and by decent, I don't mean like current decent. I mean like turn of the 1900s, like high end, like decent. Uh, where forget about your cars, forget about your mass transit, uh, but don't worry about your food and don't worry about your housing. Uh, that's going to be okay, because a lot of that stuff doesn't require high technology. A lot of that stuff actually just requires uh, technique and knowledge, which is technology, but it's a different form. And that could just be uh, a different basis for redeveloping industry. That's never going to happen. I don't know. It could. Never say never. Is consciousness the universe observing itself? Yeah. Uh, I don't think that's a very deep thing. I mean, I think that's just sort of one of those. Once you get, you're like, oh, well, yeah, of course, that's obvious. I mean, even if you're a materialist, you have to say that, of course. Like, what else would consciousness be? Is it, some other universe observing this universe? You can't say that. Of course, it's the universe observing itself. Is the universe something other than matter? Well, if you're a materialist, you can't say that. You're saying that everything is matter. Well, of course. I mean, Marx says something like that in the 1844 manuscripts. There's the famous passage about the sun and the flower, and where Marx waxes poetic and says, if we wanted to, we could literally say that that the plant, not only is the plant not independent from the sun, but the sun is not independent from the plant, because what is the plant except the expression of the sun's creative life power, and would the sun fully express itself as sun were it not the case that this flower did not exist, to express that it indeed does have the power to give life. uh, uh, we are the universe observing itself. I think the one who made that famous is Carl Sagan, but he's not the first one to say that. I don't know who said that first, but it's kind of an old thing. No, I don't think Marx was a materialist. He was not an ontological materialist. Yeah, that's the thing. It's not metaphysical materialism. It's just social materialism, relational materialism, which is really not materialism. I mean, like, the only materialist thing about it is that it's focused on externalities, but even Marx doesn't reduce it to externality. It's just the ensemble of social relations. But that is both ideal, material, and a lot of other things. On some things, he was a metaphysical materialist. The thing is, like, he was not a systematic materialist. Like, there are things where Marx will say certain things that seem physicalist, but everything else he says is not physicalist. So it's inconsistent. And thanks for the compliment on the hair. I think it's awful, but at least it looks good from that angle. I mean, the most that like Marx tried to do, like with intervening his system on science, was math. Don't make sense to me. And I've tried to read papers of people trying to make sense of it. Still doesn't make sense to me. Because I think Hegel's dialectics of mathematics make way more perfect sense. No, he did not have an epistemic framework. Mainly, he had an ontological framework, and that's what he was trying to work out. Like, the little I read about his stuff on mathematics is that he tried to show how mathematics arose from the mode of life. That, which wasn't an uncommon idea at the time. People were saying, well, of course, where does math come from? Of course, like, some guy had one thing and then he had two things, and he's like, well, you needed a concept for that, and then you start getting the basics of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and whatnot. That's the material abstraction of mathematics through the necessities of material life. Where that stops making a lot of sense is when you start getting to stuff like algebra and calculus, where a lot of that stuff did not come from the very necessities of life. Some of it did, but a lot of that was just mathematical tinkering, and the back seat snoring. Yeah, infinity isn't even a mathematical concept, by the way. It's a logical concept. But yeah, all right. Anyways, we've been going for like 3 hours and 40 minutes, which is way longer than I thought this would go on. I don't know, any further things that people want to know? Because otherwise we can just kind of leave it here. Can't you say it starts from developed from material world and then people think about it and develop a more abstract idea of math? It's not really exclusive. Well, no, it's not. Like, nobody's saying that it's exclusive. However, when you go on, both Marx and Hegel say this, the genesis of a science or the coming to be of a science does not at all determine the nature of the science itself. So, you know, how it is that we empirically came up with math has nothing to do with what math really is. You know, once math is abstracted into its own thing, it is its own thing. And, you know, to point out, well, you know, originally we came up with it by counting our hands and whatever, that's irrelevant. You know, it has nothing to do with it, really. You know, it's the same thing that David P. Levine says about economics, which, you know, he says, like, look, you know, like, we can look about how the different parts of capitalism and modern economics, you know, came about historically. But those things have nothing to do with what economics itself really is. Systematically, you know, once it achieves its own real abstraction, it is its own thing. And rather, it's not it that it should be seen in the light of them, but rather them that should be seen in the light of it. Mathematics as an abstraction from space, actually, no. When we're talking about mathematics, we're talking about like numbers and whatnot, because geometry is what comes out of the measurement of space. Mathematics as such, Hegel says, comes out of time. It's the pure abstraction of differentiated time. Because that's how you get the concepts of number. That's how you start getting differentiations of numbers and relations and whatnot. Geometry is the sensuous spatial version of mathematics, whereas mathematics as such is the non-sensuous temporal version. When I say mathematics, I mean like quantity. That's how Hegel terms it. Sciences of quantity. So geometry is the spatial science of quantity. Mathematics, arithmetic, it's the temporal science of quantity. Something else to be said about math, though, is that there is no such thing as math as such. You know, math is systems of math which are invented and constructed for certain purposes. So, you know, if you want a materialist math which has to do specifically with real matter relations and quantities limited by what real matter can do and how it can move, you have a certain kind of mathematical formalism for that. As opposed to having something like math as such, which can be any formalism of any relations that you ever wish to set up for anything quantitative. And, you know, so long as you keep, you know, coherent and consistent with the framework, you can do whatever you want. You know, the amazing thing about that is simply that sometimes that stuff ends up having a real world application. And then people are mystified by this. But the reality is that I think that when you think about it, uh, considering the history of how mathematics developed, it's actually not surprising at all. It's not surprising at all that imaginary numbers have a use, mainly because the relationship described by imaginary numbers and real numbers, in composite numbers, used in computation, used in uh, physics and whatnot, really have nothing to do with some concept of the imaginary. It's just a formalism for how we're going to determine certain things to work. It's like we get mystified by the number theory, when in fact the number theory is irrelevant to the application of these things. What the imaginary number is has no meaning for what its physical use is. What a negative number is has no meaning for what its empirical use is. Why are they mystified? Well, I think it's simple. It's just to say, like, I mean, it's literally what Marx attacks. We get caught up in abstractions, and especially when we don't understand those abstractions, we tend to give them more importance than they actually have. You look at the origin of the imaginary numbers, so-called, and the way they originate is, at first people are like, this is nonsense. It's a meaningless number. It's like, you can't have the square root of -1. That doesn't mean anything. And then some people eventually said, well, no, let's just call it an imaginary number, and like, let's keep doing math anyways. And, let's give it the symbol I, and, say that if you square it, it's -1. If you square it again, it's all these other things. And then that's it. Who cares about the meaning? And so people are just like, okay, fine. They keep working on it along with it. Simple problems unique to that formalism start arising. And then some people get some ideas. They'll go, well, what if we chart it this way? And they get a coordinate system in which you can get this complex number or relationship on a geometrical coordinate graph. And this starts being useful for other things. And people are like, oh, look, imaginary numbers are real. Why are they real? Because we can use them for something. What does that mean? Nobody knows. Nobody knows, because it never had any meaning anyways. I mean, literally, it was just like, okay, nobody knows what the meaning of square root of -1 means. We know what 1 + 1 is. We know what 1 - 2 is. We know what 1 divided by 1 is. What 1 times 1 means. We know what 1 squared means. We know what square root of 1 means. We don't know what square root of a -1 means. But who cares? It's like, that's the mystification. People just give importance to the abstraction when the abstraction never had any meaning to begin with. And, then we just take it formally, keep doing stuff with it, and then keep wondering, like, what does this mean? When it never meant anything. The reason we kept doing stuff is because we decided, well, you know what? Forget about it meaning anything. How do I feel about linguistic purism? Yeah, it's never gonna happen. I mean, language organically changes, so you can't control it. Although, I mean, nowadays language shifts so quickly that literally with one generation, like, people are talking in ways that are just like, what the fuck. Like, even when I was growing up, I had no idea what the fuck a lot of people in my high school were fucking saying. Like, they were talking about the crunk of this or the crunk of that. And I was like, what? And I never asked, what the fuck does that mean? Like, people were saying on like 4chan for years, like, wow, that's so Kino. I had no idea what the fuck that meant. I found out just like a month ago when like friends of mine on Mumble were talking about it, like, oh yeah, isn't that like a reference to something like some movie thing? I had thought that it actually been like some reference to some radio thing because I in Fresno there was like this radio show uh, by a guy named Kino, and I'm like, is that like some like nationally syndicated show or? But I never asked, I never looked at it because I didn't care. I mean, like a lot of lingo just gets created. I mean, like recently simp, like it's just words for old shit that's always been there, but people just make up new words and they take off. Being mind blown that pi and phi show up in nature. Yeah, that's definitely a part of mystification. People think that there's this thing called math that was created in abstract that then like we just found out like, oh wow, it shows up in nature. They're like, like how come math describes reality? Well, because we got it from reality, dummy. Like what do you think Newton got his fucking equation for gravity? Like from the fucking, just like dreamt up one day? No, I mean, you literally just see real things and you quantize it. And you have a forms of operation which, allow you to do what you want with it. Or if there aren't, you fucking make them up like Newton did. I mean, he made up calculus just to solve a problem of gravity. It's, so awesome. The world must be math. Well, come on. Like I have stuff like that written on my blog, especially in the philosophy of nature, where I talk about that. There are some things that are interesting, mainly because they're accidental. There's stuff like transcendental numbers and like the certain relations of infinite series. Do I wish I studied engineering? Not really. I'm not an engineering person. I wish more people studied engineering, particularly leftists. Actually, I was talking about that with my friends yesterday, in which I'm like, you notice that like most of leftists are just these cultural people. They go into the humanities and they got literature degrees and philosophy degrees, and once in a while, economics degrees, but they don't go into engineering, despite the fact that if you actually care about the material means of production and pushing things to their limit, that's where you would go. That's exactly where you go. Engineering, all kinds of engineering, materials engineering, electrical engineering, all I'm aware of, all comes from engineering, not theoretical physics, but engineering, because it's engineers who discover weird shit all the time. Engineers tinker with stuff. Such that they're actually baffled by things, in which like they're like, I was tinkering with this magnet and I realized it was doing some things that I like supposedly we understand, but I realized we don't understand it. There's a guy who I watch every once in a blue moon named Michael Distinti, I think, electrical engineer. He has his own theory, completely mathematized and everything, about electrodynamics. And he does just some really basic experiments for shit, and he's had like some amazing discoveries, because I think they could be called that. Like there's one in which like he says like, okay, we say that polarization works a certain way, I don't know if you've ever seen like these things where like they show you that you take two polarizers and then flip them at 45-degree angles. If you put them together, it's like there is no polarizer. And this guy like was doing something one day with polarizers, testing something out, and he noticed that in the reflection, he was doing it on top of a mirror on the table, and he noticed that the reflection of the polarizers were inverted on the mirror, and that got him to think about something weird. Because he said like if it worked the way that they say it normally works, you should see the polarization the same. You know, you have a left polarized and an unpolarized on this side, but in the mirror it's switched, and that's very bizarre. And so then he went ahead and did some experiments showing like how this happens, and then showing the mathematics of what this means. And like either way, stuff like that is interesting. And he said that this had some interesting electrical properties. It intimated or implied. So stuff like that interesting. Opinion of bankers and stock market speculators. Parasites. I mean, banks get away with loaning at the rates that they do because they're allowed to. That's about it. You know, the Fed sets the interest rates for things. You know, I'm not, you know, money is property like anything else. You can alienate it as you wish through contracts. So, you know, making a contract of, you know, I'll lend you my money, give it back to me, you know, with interest. Okay. You know, it's no more magical than industrial capitalism. It's, you know, it just works in a different, you know, you can do that. The thing is, though, the risks of that, you know, 200K just to be a hedge fund manager, that seems low. But yeah, I mean, like, I don't think it's unethical. I don't think stock market speculation is unethical. Of course, people play games behind the public's back. That's what's unethical, but you know that happens anyways. To me, like there should be a public economy and a private economy. They're very hard to keep apart because they affect each other very strongly. But something like, you know, the public economy, like having people speculating on stocks and whatnot, fine, you know, fine. You want to gamble? Go ahead. When things crash, you're fucked. And you own it. No bailouts. Beyond that, you know, I don't care. Although it's a miserable life, to be honest. I mean, like, have you seen what those people fucking do all day? It's just like sitting there staring at numbers go up and down all day. And, you know, like literally jizzing, the line goes up, and crying as the line goes down. What is it? Gems, something gems, uncut gems, or whatever. Good movie, by the way. Sandler makes a very good Jewish businessman for a character. But yeah, it's a miserable life. Very few people can live it. You know, if you can handle it, go for it. You know, if you do it just because, you know, well, I want to be rich and, you know, live my hedonistic life, can't stop you. I don't think you should. You know, I think that if you're going to make that much money, you should do something with that money with social benefit, particularly social benefit for, you know, actually developing the means of freedom in communities and people around you. But you know, the meaning of that is pretty broad. You could do something with that, patronizing arts, you know, being a patron. You can do that with helping people. You could be the Engels to my Marx. You can help me keep theorizing for the rest of my life. You know, well, I don't do anything else. That'd be nice. See a libertarian Leninist rants. Beyond that, if you can, do it. You know, don't be an asshole, but you kind of have to be an asshole for those jobs, so it's not saying much. But all right, it seems yeah we've gone about 4 hours, and conversation has run its course for now. Fun doing a live stream after such a long time. Don't know if I should keep this up. Somebody mentioned my my legal name. Don't know that I want anybody else to know it, just 'cause I don't want them to call me by it. But so I'll probably leave it up. Anyways, see you guys around. This has been Antonio Wolf. I'll see about doing a bit more live streams from at least the next month or so. There's still plenty to be talked about in various things. Depends on the mood of the day. All right. See ya.